It all happened when the heroine was struggling with severe depression. On the road, flooded with sunset light, she remembers seeing pigs in a small truck that were being transported to the slaughterhouse. Every time the truck turned, the animals squealed and swayed from side to side, and she, watching this, sobbed loudly. The cold metal bars, her wavy red hair, and at that moment it was a luxurious thought. After all, back then the heroine didn't yet know that one day she would find herself in a worse position than those links. Iron bars in front of a crowd of locals. Perhaps she was crying out of pity for the pigs, or maybe because of the villain in the novel who was too pathetic. This story is about a villain named Haley, a girl from the novel who was too unhappy and her life was extremely sad. When the locals saw her being carried away in a cage, they shouted loudly for the villainess to die quickly or simply burn in hell. The cries that the girl should disappear from this world forever and die in Marin Castle filled the heroine with real horror. Someone dared to throw an egg at her, calling her a damned witch, and someone even wanted her to be simply buried in a landfill. Haley sat behind the iron bars, not understanding why she lived like this at all and how she ended up in this situation. People continued to throw stones at her, but even if it was for the sake of others, once she had done evil deeds, in the end, it would still end up that way. Haley killed people to help someone, cursed people to make someone king, and took eternal shame on herself over and over again. But it was she who turned out to be the villain, and these someones became the main positive heroes of this world. They abandoned her, turned away, and eventually killed her, and this is a merciless story of villainy from the villain's perspective. A short novel where the main characters became nasty because of it, a story about one abandoned villain, and that same villain from the book is a girl named Haley. The main character, Haley Marin, was taken to the border of another country by knights and asked to stop pretending to be crazy. They were forbidden to talk to this woman, and she was the main criminal. A fragile girl with long red hair and ruby eyes sat behind cold bars, and everyone was sure that she was a witch. But only the heroine knew that if she really were Haley, she wouldn't care about this at all, especially not about stupid curses. Grabbing the bars, Haley decided to see what she could do in this story. When one of the knights passed by the cage, she grabbed him by the cloak and asked him to fulfill her request. The boy screamed for the madwoman to let him go, but Haley promised to curse him if he didn't let her cry to keep warm. The commander asked the escort to give him a cloak so that the captive could finally close her mouth. Wrapped in her cloak, Haley leaned her head against the bars of the cage, thinking that life really was a strange thing. On the one hand, being in a novel was just wonderful, but there was another, less pleasant side. After all, Haley would have to play the role of a villain with a fatal outcome, and she thought that was definitely too much. The villain from the novel, or was she just a sorceress who wanted to be loved and recognized? But it was sad to see how she pretended to be strong day after day, suffering from a lack of love, because in the end the girl ran away to be used. As a result, after all the horror that happened to her, she became a money-hungry, bloodthirsty demon. An enemy of the three major kingdoms who harmed nobles, and in the end, she simply became a puppet whose fate was predetermined. She was called a murderer who brought misfortune to many people with forbidden strong magic. The nobles ordered the girl to be sent to the castle of Marin, wanting her to die in complete solitude. So Haley became the villain of the century, sentenced to an execution worse than death, and now she was the one sitting in a cage behind cold bars. The three kingdoms wanted to execute Haley by cutting off her head, but the church was categorically against it. Cutting off a witch's head would not help. So they decided to send the girl to a wilderness called Marin Castle. Those lands were infected with magic, and everyone wanted to force her to breathe the infected air so that she would become a wandering corpse, forgetting who she was. Those who are inconvenient to kill directly are left alone with death in this very castle of Marin. Haley loudly asked the commander what the name of the two-letter kingdom was that had a king who had recently died. She wanted him to say that the man had not died because of her fault, but the commander was sure that the witch's tricks would not work and that they were under the protection of the church. Haley asked for money. They said she had made a fortune, but in fact, she herself did not know where she hid the money, and besides, the heroine still had to die. The commander once again asked the assistant not to respond to this woman under any circumstances and never to engage in dialogue with her again. Suddenly the carriage stopped, but looking around she saw only a raging river and there was no castle here. It didn't look like Marin Castle at all. Haley had a bad feeling about it because the commander had said they had arrived. In the book itself, the story began after Haley was thrown into the Marin Castles, and nothing was said about that part, but it was strange, and there was no road visible anywhere for people to walk on. Below, the river roared, swirling and foaming, stormy. It seemed like a living creature. Ready to swallow everything in its path, the cage rolled to the edge of the cliff. Finally, the commander asked the witch to repent on the cursed land until her last breath. As the cage fell off the cliff, fear paralyzed Haley. She knew her chances of surviving in that water were slim. She was abandoned like an unnecessary thing, like a broken toy, cruelty, a chilling sentence, and only the roar of the river became louder, closer. At the last moment, Haley managed to take a breath, and now she was already flying down into the abyss, the wind whistling in her ears, and the river was inexorably approaching. She tried to catch a glimpse of the faces of her tormentors, but saw only malicious grins and indifferent eyes. Impact! The freezing water was seething in a powerful stream. Haley fought with the current with panic, trying to survive. The storm raged inside and outside, but somewhere deep in the girl's soul a spark of hope smoldered. Haley couldn't breathe, and it was all terribly painful, and the heroine didn't understand how she could survive at all, having gotten into this novel. But she was still alive and ready to fight, her hands wrapped around the wet tree roots. She had to cling to something, even if death awaited her. Then she was ready to die, holding onto the roots. She managed to grab onto the roots and saw the cage falling into the turbulent waters, but the water became transparent and the darkness gradually disappeared. Haley didn't know if she was being sucked into the current. She was starting to panic, but at that moment someone's hand grabbed her fragile wrist. Somehow she found herself on the bank of a raging river, and she could only feel panic taking over her entire body. Haley didn't understand what had just happened, and it felt like she had absorbed the darkness of the turbulent waters. But Haley was permanently deprived of mana, and she could no longer use her magic, but in any case, the girl survived, and someone's voice was heard nearby. Lying on the shore, she looked with frightened eyes at the little man with green hair, who became indignant. The girl roughly grabbed him by the hair. The little hero asked how he had even stayed alive and who that girl was, since she had somehow purified him. This little boy with green hair the color of mud asked if the girl really came here for the feeling, which means that others can survive too. She saw a strange creature in front of her and did not understand anything of what he was saying. And those very roots of the trees turned out to be not trees at all, but the hair of this little magical man. It didn't matter at all. The main thing was that Haley was still alive. The little hero's name was Dryad, but the lady couldn't answer any of his questions. As it turned out, somehow Haley herself pulled out and healed the little wizard who was dying in the poisoned lake. It is quite possible that the little man meant absorbing magic, and the heroine somehow miraculously managed to do this. Haley decided that since she had become a savior, perhaps the little man would help her in return and take her to Marin Castle. The Dryad said that in order to get to the Baron's estate, one must make one's way through the contaminated land for half a day. A mountainous terrain awaits her, and there is not a single road along which a person can pass. The Dryad knew one road well, so he gladly agreed to accompany his savior. However, the girls managed to save him from dying from infection, but while he was speaking, Haley seemed to doze off and felt very weak. Everything was quite strange and surprising. The little man just felt someone's gaze on him. A small, evil creature with glowing red eyes stopped right in front of the heroes, growling throughout the forest. And in horror, Dryad realized that there were corpses at every step, and monsters were jumping out from everywhere. The terrible monster rushed straight at the little man, and the Dryad screamed that he did not want to die at all. He closed his little eyes, not believing it, because he had just been cleansed, and now a terrible death awaited him. As soon as the evil creature jumped on Haley, it immediately turned into a cute white rabbit. The monster was purified by touching the girl's body, which means that not only it, but also other infected creatures can be purified by Haley's power. The little rabbit, who had been a monster a few seconds ago, was sitting right in front of the heroine, and Dryad couldn't understand who this girl was and how this was possible. The Dryad's survival instinct, having returned from the brink of death, led to one conclusion: Haley possesses powerful magic. All this time, the girl slept from exhaustion, not suspecting what was happening here, and everything was too suspicious. The Dryad understood one thing: in order to live to the end of his days, he had to be next to this man. As soon as Haley opened her eyes, Dryad revealed that she had just turned a creepy monster into a rabbit. The girl was indignant. While she was unconscious, the Dryad was nearby and turned out to be faithful, but it turned out that he simply could not go anywhere without her. The forest was teeming with creepy monsters, Haley noticed suspiciously, but fresh green grass appeared in the place where she lay. It's strange. The grass should be pressed by the body, but it looks fragrant, and besides, the Dryad, whom she was simply holding, also purified himself. Haley realized that maybe if she touched other creatures, her magical powers would break the terrible curse. Having touched the tree, the girl was very happy, because sensations were possible with a simple touch, and the body itself absorbed magic upon contact. Haley screamed with joy, knowing that the heroine must have some special, incredible ability. There are no settlers without abilities, and Dryad was surprised. Haley was clearly a person with unheard of magic. He asked if the girl was really an important person, both there and outside, and how she got into the affair in the first place. Haley wasn't exactly important, just a little famous, and she said she'd done too many terrible things. She also said that she was supposed to be executed, but she managed to escape, and Dryad realized that this girl was a criminal. Haley Marin turned out to be the villain from the novel he was reading, which means that, having inhabited this body, she must forever hide on this earth. But the heroine was not going to die a ridiculous death a year later like in the original, and she lived happily ever after. As they wanted, Haley and her new friend went to live in the heart of the contaminated zone, not necessarily in luxury. The main thing is life. In any case, only the main character will save the world, and the girl took over the body of the villain, whom the whole world hated. And for the sake of everyone's good, she knew it was better to go into self-isolation and just enjoy the beautiful moments. Haley touched the dried flower, and the next second it turned into a flowering plant. She suggested that her new friend explore the paths and clean the plants, but Dryad called the girl a reckless person, and she might run out of strength before she arrived. The heroes understood that staying overnight in a forest teeming with monsters was definitely not a very good idea. There was still half a day left to go, and Dryad suggested first getting to the Baron's castle, settling in there, and then starting the experience. So, having gone through a long and difficult path in the terrible forest, the heroes finally managed to reach their goal. Finally, Haley stepped onto the paved path, which meant they had reached their destination, to the place where they would now live, the terrible and frightening castle of Marin. Haley was happy. They managed to get there before sunset, and they definitely wouldn't have to spend the night in the scary forest. The Dryad was only thinking about how to get inside as quickly as possible, because the air suddenly made his stomach churn. Haley carefully opened the castle doors, deciding to go inside, but at that moment the heroes met a local resident. It was a huge, sinister mandrake, which flew out of the doors of the gloomy castle with screams and whistles. There was pure magic here, incomparable to the outside environment, and perhaps that was why Taraja was drooling and being capricious. Once inside the castle, Haley knew that this place would become a refuge in the future, and she was going to cleanse Marin Castle with an incredible ability. Haley was serious about creating a comfortable place for herself to live in exile until her death, and a year later she succeeded. Green plants were fragrant around the castle, and the heroine, together with her faithful assistant, was watering the beds. They managed to grow a potato crop, and Haley knew that dwelling on the past and being angry would ruin tomorrow. Perhaps for 100-year-old Taraja, a person's life is too short, which is why he could do such stupid things. The lady carefully watered the flowers, and looking at one bush, she could not believe her eyes, because the flowers really had blossomed. She screamed with joy, and the fragrant strawberries finally ripened, and it was an incredibly sweet moment. A year ago, the heroine picked up a Dryad on the road. He turned out to have a talent for farming, and in agreement with the tree spirits, they grew sweet strawberries. The heroes laughed with joy, and Haley began to get confused about where she was, in a novel, or had moved to a village where butterflies flew along the beds, and the sweet smell of strawberries tickled her nose. The heroine admitted that she was incredibly happy with her new friend all year, and they got along great. But as soon as Taraja heard the word too, his small eyes widened in bewilderment. He asked the lady not to speak like that under any circumstances, and was probably simply offended by human speech. There was one fact that the heroine discovered during the year of cleaning Marin Castle. What she was doing was more like obesity than cleansing. The real Haley was a girl with beautiful scarlet hair, like a full-bodied rose, but when she cleansed the pollution, her hair became black as coal. The heroine often wondered if the original Haley also ate magic instead of food to survive. Through daily efforts, she was able to restore the backyard and stone wall, but now she had to walk to the pollution boundary to get her fill. And it's not for nothing that in the past the heroine completed mobile farming games to the end, thanks to her stubbornness and persistence. In that sense, it would be nice if another elf showed up. Taraja was good at farming, but this time she needed someone who was good at cleaning and cooking. Suddenly, Haley heard a strange sound, but in this huge estate, she knew that she was alone. Apart from her, there are only polluted plants and monsters here, as well as a bunch of walking dead. As she walked through the forest, Haley noticed in horror that a terrifying zombie, which she had never seen before, was following her right on her heels. The girl screamed, "This is her territory, and the monster should go away." But the young man grabbed her hand. The magic of purification began to shine around the lady, but the evil dead man whispered where Haley Marin was. The dead man's face appeared right next to the heroine, and he confessed that he had come to kill this woman. But the next words he spoke were incredibly strange, and the zombie spoke of the woman who destroyed his family. At that moment, Haley finally realized who was standing in front of her. It was one of the main characters in the novel. It was this young man who hated Haley with all his soul, and he was the one who would ultimately kill the girl. This young man's name was Reichart Winter, but as soon as he touched the girl, he fell to the ground unconscious. And Haley looked in surprise at the hero, who for some reason fainted right here. The young man could not be left alone. Certain death awaited him, and the lady had to drag him through the forest straight to the castle. She was angry, all because of little Taraja, because thanks to him she learned that she could cleanse the land and came across this young man. Finally, Haley dragged it and put it on the grass, but it was strange, it acts differently, but for some reason the original did not change. The boy was not dead yet, although he looked like he would die soon, and apparently it was only a matter of time before he turned into a real corpse. In the past, this young man cursed the heroine, the one who trampled his heart and betrayed his love. He wanted her to feel the weight of guilt, and the tears shed for her sake would make the girl regret and suffer forever. Haley was the one in charge of the villain factory, and it was because of her that the once kind young man turned into a real horror. Rejected on the lands of defense, she cursed his family for a year until she met her death at the hands of one man. Haley's death was the final key to the demon's emergence, and in the future, the Marin estate became their cradle. The demons born from Haley's anger, sadness, and fear escaped from the infected zone and began to commit all sorts of atrocities. The main character and the 4 men who were in love with her united to destroy them, and that was the main plot of the story. And the one who killed that very Haley then left the Marin estate, losing his human form. There was Reichart Winter, who later joined the main character's group. Taraja noticed that the young man was infected with demonic energy, and if he had been a little bit more, he would have definitely been wandering around here dead. Usually people lose their minds in this place during the day. He was able to keep his mind and get here. He is not yet fully infected, but later he may awaken as a half-demon, unable to neither live nor die, and there is a chance he will try to kill Haley. The girl had no choice, and the reason she saved Reichart, he came to kill her. Reichart was the only innocent victim out of the 4 main characters. His family was wiped out, and he alone survived, dedicating himself to revenge. The heroine thought that his hatred for Haley was completely justified because she once broke his heart. The boy had a lot of demonic energy left, and it was interesting to see how long he had been wandering around the infected area. Haley decided to help him and send him back as soon as possible, and no matter how pathetic he was, she didn't want to get involved with the main characters. She touched him to cleanse him, but at that moment the young man opened his eyes and grabbed the girl by the hands. Surprisingly, he came to his senses very quickly and shouted what kind of place this was and where she had brought him. Haley's plan to recover the boy and hide failed, and she responded that he was at the Marin estate. Reichart grabbed her friend and asked what the 2 of them were doing in such a place, not believing that they lived there. It was very strange. The young man acted as if he didn't recognize Haley at all, but that definitely couldn't be the case. At that moment, the heroine remembered that in the original, when he came to Marin's estate, at the moment of turning into a half-demon, he lost all his memories. Perhaps this time the cause of memory loss was not the transformation, but the consequences of mixing demonic energy and purification. This explained why the young man did not remember anything, and he had indeed forgotten his past. And most importantly, he forgot that Haley is his main enemy, so the lady confessed that she is his savior. She found it funny that the young man clearly had amnesia, because he asked with interest whether the girl had really saved his life. Haley told him not to worry and offered him a place to rest at the estate, offering him food and a warm, soft place to sleep. And just in time, a deafening fireworks display thundered in the sky as if nature was celebrating her salvation. Suddenly a spring rain began, and the heroine thoughtfully invited the young man to go inside. He found himself in a beautiful old castle, located in the very center of the infected zone. It is known that not a single living creature has survived here in the last 100 years, and even attempts to measure the level of contamination are impossible. It is not surprising that the first guest who visited this house was speechless, because Haley put a lot of effort into making this castle a peaceful place to live. After a few sensations, there was no place a person could go here, and magic wasn't the biggest problem. After all, the heroes lacked other things most of all, and these were ordinary fire and food. But to this day, they have not managed to solve any of these problems, and the fire had to be constantly monitored. The window was open, and the fire was simply doused with rain, while Taraja complained that no one was looking after the fire. In other words, the level of civilization of the heroes was at the level of primitive people, and this was previously shouted, "The lady only does what is engaged in cleaning the contaminated territory." The little elf was screaming. He was doing all the housework by himself, and Haley couldn't even tend to the fire or cook. Haley began to get nervous when Taraja yelled at her, assuring her that the fire could be rekindled. The elf asked to take responsibility and light the fire before bed so as not to force the guest to sleep in an icy room. Haley picked up 2 stones to create a spark and prayed for the fire to rekindle, but to no avail. She was busily beating stones against each other, and the young man asked if she was really going to make a fire with 2 stones. The young man looked at this in surprise, and the lady admitted that she had succeeded in everything before. Reichart asked to give him stones, and was probably going to help the heroes light a fire. He took a strange device out of his pocket, and within a second had successfully produced a spark. The heroes were simply in shock. The fire lit up the first time, filling the entire room with warmth. Haley looked at the device and asked what it was, and the young man said that he had bought the item in the taverns for travelers. It wasn't magic at all, but an ordinary object that simply easily lit a fire. The young man suggested that if the problem was with the fireplace, it would be better to buy a magic one that could maintain the fire on a permanent basis. Haley never thought that there was some kind of magic fireplace that didn't need to be lit every time. It was a world where people lived. And somewhere here there were civilized things, but in this damned old castle there was nothing left at all. That is why the heroine got up every day with the sunrise and went to bed with the sunset. The little elf appeared on the threshold, holding dry firewood in his hands, and he was just in time. But Taraji looked very strange, and he had a face that the heroine had not seen even in a year of living together. The fire enveloped the entire room of the gloomy castle with warmth, and this day became the most unusual for all the heroes. Haley and her little friend had to sleep under the same blanket because he gave the girl's blanket to the guest. They argued. The elf gave Reichart strawberries, and Haley was outraged by this, but if the master had not helped, the girl would still be striking sparks from the stone. Reichart watched with a calm face as they argued over food, and the elf promised to give the lady strawberries tomorrow. The young man looked at the lady and could not understand who this woman was, but he and she had the same face, the same body, but the evil witch was not able to smile. He saw her in a completely different form, a woman living with the forest spirits, working with her fragile wrists. She is happy with just 5 juicy strawberries and smiles with eyes that do not contain a drop of evil. Reichart couldn't understand. This girl didn't look like the villainous witch Haley, but like a sweet and kind lady. And there was a lot of slander surrounding Haley, and it was not for nothing that she was imprisoned in the Marin estate, and the young man was confused. For a long time, Reichart was a puppet created by the Winter family, and his life was not his own at all. My father always said that his family was all he had and he should exist only for his family and not trust anyone. For those who bear the name Winter, only loneliness is a friend, and the boy was raised as an Iron Man, the ideal heir created in the duchy. The father always insisted that the boy should be driven by the interests of the family, and this is how young Reichart was raised. In order not to tarnish the family name, he was forced to be perfect, and emotions were called the lot of the weak. Winter's heir had no need for emotions, and the boy was taught that he should never know doubt. The young heir of Winter was never supposed to doubt his powers, and he does not show his emotions to anyone. So, the boy is related to the most ideal heir, whom the head of the family wanted. I don't know what he wants, living the way the family wanted. But that didn't change even when the Winter clan was completely destroyed and Reichart was left alone. Before his death, the father asked for revenge for the untimely death of his relatives and brothers from the very same witch who destroyed their family. Revenge was his duty. It was not grief or loss that moved the young man. It was duty and responsibility that moved him. For the sake of revenge, he was even ready to die, just to take revenge on the evil witch Haley. But the winner did not even grant him an honorable death, and for some reason left the young man alive. Then Haley admitted that the young man must live so that she would not forget what she had done on this earth. It seemed to Reichart that the girl felt guilty, and this was definitely hypocrisy for someone who had destroyed an entire clan. And he couldn't believe that she had finally gotten what she wanted, but the witch knew that Reichart would never understand her. After that, he tried again and again, failed, and with each failure the sense of duty and revenge faded, and one day all that was left was curiosity. It's funny, but being fixated on an object and place, for the first time in his life he wanted to get to know another person, and unexpected news came a few days later. The evil sorceress Haley did kill King Holt and was captured by the Crown Prince and exiled to Marin Castle. Reichart couldn't believe that the Crown Prince had really caught some witch, and what's more, he calmly sent the link. The last fate of the woman whom it seemed nothing could kill was exile, and Reichart's struggle ended in meaninglessness. At first he even tried to forget her and move on, changed his name, profession, environment, in order to forget his family and live a normal life. A day passed, a month, one day a year passed, and at one point Reichart finally understood something. He had absolutely nothing left, and life without calling Haley seemed meaningless to him. The young man, created to be the heir of the family, one day had nothing left of himself. One day he realized that there was only one choice. He had to finish the unavenged revenge and find the witch. One dark evening, Reichart went to Marin Castle to kill Haley and then die himself. But he had thought so before, and now, finding himself in the castle, he was chopping wood early in the morning, offering to help the lady. Haley thoughtfully offered him a sweet strawberry, and in return he offered her a piece of jerky. It had been a whole day since he had been here, and he still hadn't taken his eyes off her for a minute, suspecting that Haley was a cunning sorceress who had lost her mana and was deceiving him. But the more he watched, the clearer one thing became. Haley Marin had lost her memory, and she was living with no common sense at all. After all this, the young man understood that he could not consider this woman an object of revenge, and that one could not judge an innocent person by the mistakes of the past. For Reichart, the purpose of life had disappeared without a trace, as if this person had never existed, and the young man wondered what he should do now. But in order to sort out this confusion in his head, he decided to observe later and realized that he had to see everything himself. Perhaps this will be a great chance to understand what is going on in Reichart's heart and whether he needs this revenge. He was wrong when he called Haley a villain. He saw a kind and sweet girl in front of him. The appearance of Reichart brought huge changes to the lives of the heroes, just like the god from myths brought fire to people. He fed the lady delicious meat marinated in sweet sauce, and the sweetness they tasted for the first time in the land of sinners seemed like a revolution in their mouths. It felt like a sin, and after tasting the forbidden fruit, Haley might never be able to return to her past life again. The lady declared that she had no more strength to endure it, and that civilization had to be brought into the new life. The little elf and the young man exchanged glances. The lady's statement was too unexpected. Haley tried to find out which road the young man had taken, but he insisted that he had arrived alone, without companions. The elf insisted. The man was found in an uncontaminated state. If they could clear a shortcut, it would be possible to get out to the city. Reichart showed a map with a mark indicating the place where the heroes now live. The lady refused to believe in his amnesia, and grabbing the card in her hand, asked him to give it to her. If the heroes had seeds, they could farm, but there is almost nothing left here, and they need to go to town to buy wheat seeds. Haley seemed out of sorts today, and she insisted that it wasn't the most important thing for her and the elf right now. She turned the map in front of her eyes and soon realized that she understood absolutely nothing and did not know how to read maps. The elf didn't understand what good a map was if she couldn't read it, but Reichart could read maps. The young man also admitted that he knew how to ride horses and drive a cart, but he had never done it before. He laughed and asked how much the lady was going to buy to fill the whole cart. Haley glared at the boy. He laughed and probably thought he could do anything. Castle Marin has generally maintained a policy of isolation, but the heroes have decided to accept a little help from outsiders, and it's time for civilization. Together with Reichart, she decided to go to the city, and the elf was worried that people would be careful on the way. He asked her not to pick up anything from the ground for food, to help anyone, and not to follow anyone else. The boy asked the girl to hurry up while she continued to argue with the little Taraja. As she followed the gentleman, she did not understand that he had almost died just a day ago, but he still continued to be reckless. Haley noticed from their first meeting that the boy had too wide a stride, and trying to catch up with him, she twisted her ankle. As soon as Reichart asked her to hurry up, she didn't notice how she almost tripped and fell face first into the ground. Reichart decided to minimize the time of contact with magic and suggested buying the bare necessities and then slowly building the road. The lady was worried that if things continued like this, the young man would become a walking dead man before he even had time to see the village. Haley wasn't in the habit of holding hands with men, but given the current situation, there was nothing she could do. She invited the young man to take her hand to cleanse him along the way so that he would not become infected. The situation was similar to when she begged him to take her hand, but the young man said that he was completely fine. She laughed. Reichart suggested being independent and self-sufficient and happily walked after him. A walk through the contaminated area could not be called a romantic journey, and the heroes had to walk, crunching dead trees under their feet. But it wasn't all that bad. The sky was still blue and the clouds were white, like the sugar and flour that await at the end of the road. The desecrated land seemed much larger than Haley had imagined, and soon Reichart reported that they were about halfway across. The young man admitted that it wouldn't hurt for the girl to learn how to read maps, but she said that she hated studying. Looking at the map, he said that if they moved in a certain direction, they would reach the place in just one day's journey. But no matter how much he tried to explain it, Haley refused to listen to him and didn't even look in his direction. The young man did not understand what was happening and saw the girl looking fascinatedly at another part of the forest. She stopped dead in her tracks, looking at the raging river that had caught her attention. The Black Lake was clearly visible from the Marin castle, and the heroine always sat in the castle, and for the first time she saw the lake so close. Before it was corrupted by magic, it was a beautiful place. A sparkling pearl, but now the forest and lake were gloomy, and demonic energy had swallowed up all the light. Haley knew it would take forever to absorb the thick energy in this state, but maybe someday she would be able to return the lake to its azure hue. Looking at the black, gloomy water, the lady asked with a smile if she would ever be able to make this place beautiful. The heroine dreamed of living a peaceful and quiet life, raising a farm near the castle, and the beautiful lake would fit perfectly into this landscape. She saw how every morning the birds would sing in the forest, like in the fairy tale about Snow White, and she would gallop along the shore of the lake on a snow-white horse. Reichart considered her words complete nonsense, and he did not at all treat her as his savior. The young man was surprised. Haley said that she had forgotten everything, but he did not understand how she could be so sure of what she wanted and what she dreamed of. He didn't have such confidence and such desires, and he didn't understand where the girl, the villain, got so much good hope from. The heroes left Marin Castle 3 days ago. After the endless mountains, they came across a wide road, and every day they encountered the defiled. Pale skin, dark energy that seemed to flow through them, empty gray eyes like a zombie. They were mostly traitors, criminals rejected by the 3 kingdoms or the Order. They seemed to be attacking only the boy, but they didn't even try to harm Haley. The zombies couldn't harm Haley in any way, but she didn't want to cleanse them for fear of facing revenge. Haley didn't want to turn them back into humans, and Reichart realized he was definitely lucky that the girl helped him. Perhaps he thought that he himself could find himself in the same situation and was upset by her words. The hero's journey continued. Zombies appeared, the young man eliminated them, and when he was infected with magic, Haley cleansed him. The journey even looked funny, and Haley watched with interest as Reichart dealt with the zombies. The heroine thought she must have caused the young man so much trouble and was a little guilty before him. But it is good that he has not forgotten how to use a sword, and it would be terrible if he forgot everything he had learned for so long. She thought Reichart was strange. He went to kill the real Haley, but instead helped the fake and endured all the hardships of the journey. The young man was exhausted by illness and the long journey, but he never complained and always walked ahead of the girl. Of the few edible berries in the area, he gave them to Haley and ate the tasteless roots himself and never complained. Despite the fact that the young man looked more tired, he was always the first to take up his watch, and the heroine was weak in front of good people. She didn't tell him that in this desecrated zone, she didn't need to eat or sleep, and that the heroine's body seemed inhuman. Suddenly, the young man asked the girl if she remembered what she had done in the past and why she lived alone in the Crow Castle. Hearing this question, Haley realized that this was not a good sign and admitted that she did not really remember what happened. The young man asked her to listen to him and warned her that when they left the contaminated area, she should not tell anyone that she was Haley. Even if the heroine wanted to, she didn't know the real Haley, but she wondered why Reichart asked about it and whether he really forgot everything. To begin with, she decided to play along with him and told him that when she woke up, she was in a cage and was immediately thrown into a gorge. Haley explained that she had been trying her best to survive and get to the castle, and in response asked if Reichart remembered who he really was. The young man said that he was the heir of Duke Winter, but now everyone was dead and nothing was left of his family. His name is on the wanted list that people distributed, and the heroine was surprised. He probably remembered everything. After the heroes entered the desecrated zone, everything became a little confused, and the young man could no longer explain why he came here, risking his life. He was beginning to think that what he believed so firmly might be a lie, and his memory had indeed faded slightly. Suddenly, in the middle of his words, Reichart lowered his head, and the lady noticed that something was wrong with him. During the journey, the young man became heavily infected and simply waited for the heroine to cleanse him, without saying a word. But even in self-sacrifice, there must be a measure if it were a little elf. He would have turned everything upside down long ago. Haley took the young man's hand and just prayed that he would be cleansed and healed soon. Contrary to her expectations, he turned out to be a good travel companion. He was kind, attentive, and at times even tactful. But for some reason, such a person was a symbol of misfortune in the original novel, and I didn't understand whether it was really impossible to give him a happy ending. The young man snored sweetly in his sleep, and the girl felt incredibly sorry for his kind heart. It's good that she noticed it before it was too late. Before the boy turned into a demon, he still had some memories left. Haley was glad she was able to clear him and wanted him to find his way to a happy life. Reichart was supposed to confess his love to the main character and rise high thanks to his swordsmanship and rule the world. Only Haley wanted him to forget about playing a tragic male character suffering from hopelessness. In the morning, the heroes continued their journey. They almost arrived and saw a sign, and they had to cross the line. Just beyond the line will be the manufacturing city of Selbon, which was the main target. The landscape did not look particularly urban, and the heroine saw a small village in front of her, which must surely have a forge. Reichart warned the girl that she must introduce herself as his sister, and under no circumstances give her name. The heroes had to be careful before buying anything, and the young man thoughtfully offered them a snack. They went into the nearest tavern, and the lady presented the heroes with a delicious, aromatic chicken. Haley even started drooling because she hadn't seen such civilized food in a long time in isolation. The young man confessed that the girl had been hungry for a long time and asked to prepare something easily digestible. The lady carefully served a large piece of spiced meat in a hot stew, and Haley's mouth kept watering. Vegetables and meat carefully cooked, this broth was simply divine, and the heroine tried to savor every piece. The young man decided to get something else and asked the girl not to rush because she had not eaten such delicious food for a long time. Reichart stated that it would be more convenient for him to do some things alone, but warned that when they returned to the castle, the lady would begin to study. Haley felt that everything was going according to plan, and she told Reichart that she couldn't read. But in fact, during this damned year, she mastered all the letters, and her fingerprints remained on every book in Marin Castle. There was only one reason why she lied, and suddenly someone asked where the girl's boyfriend was. Haley was outraged that it was not her boyfriend, but the lady from the tavern who offered the girl to try a delicious dessert. She happily devoured the delicious sweets, and there were good people working here. In fact, the girl mistook her for a beggar and fed her out of pity. Too much had been happening here lately, and the lady was simply worried. But Haley decided to clear the air. She had no money problems at all, and rather, she was very rich. Over the past years, while she was cleaning out Marin Castle, she found a whole treasury. There were mountains of gold bars and jewels. Now the heroine had only 2 sets of clothes, a cloak that she took from the guard and a dress made of wood fibers that an elf made for her. She borrowed the rest of her things from Reichart. She needed to find clothes, so she asked the girl where the store was. There were no separate clothing stores in the small village, the girl said. Here they sew everything themselves. When merchants come to town, there is something to buy, and the heroine asked if the lady would have any extra fabric. She asked with a smile why the guy didn't buy her clothes, and Haley angrily replied that he was the one who saved her at the edge of the forest. She admitted that she would like to thank him. The girl replied that in this world there is no better gratitude than money. Haley asked to sell some fabric, offering to pay in real gold coins. An old coin from the treasury of the castle of Marin. It was minted a long time ago, so it was different from the current ones. But gold remained gold everywhere, and the lady was surprised whether the lady really was rich. This girl's name was Fatima, and she offered to pick out clothes that didn't fit in size. While rummaging through the chests, Fatima offered 3 sets of clothes, dried meat, and almost new kitchen utensils. Meanwhile, Reichart returned with the purchases. It was probably hard for him to carry everything alone. Apparently, he carefully selected the things necessary for primitive life. He found me a magic stove, but bought universal oil to light the fire. He also got hold of some sugar beet seeds somewhere, a whole bunch of flour, and Haley wondered how they were going to carry it all back. Reichart looked at her with anticipation and clearly saw how the girl was happy with ordinary seeds. Unexpectedly, she asked the young man to go to bed early because he had hardly slept while they were walking here and was constantly on guard. Reichart was planning to do just that, get some sleep today, and go to the market together tomorrow morning to buy a horse. And he reminded Haley that she herself wanted to saddle a white horse and run along the shore. Reichart admitted that with a horse he would be more enthusiastic about cleaning, and he really believed that the girl would be able to clean the lake. In fact, from the very beginning of this trip, she had planned to leave him and go alone, pretending that she couldn't read, and all for the sake of one plan. Reichart, who has taken on all the work, will be exhausted and fall into a deep sleep, and he will forget Haley's stupid dreams over time, because at this time the main character should appear. The heroes would meet somewhere fatefully and fall in love with each other, and she wanted the main character to forget about a person like her. She sent the young man to bed, wishing him good night, and was sure that he would forget everything that had happened before. So at night she packed her heavy bags and told Fatima that she was going home. She saw in Haley a fighting girl who said it was time for the boy to go his own way. Fatima offered to take the signature seasoning as a thank you for the lady eating their food with such a huge appetite. The thoughtful lady gave her a secret spice from the tavern, and Haley couldn't believe that this gift was just for her appetite. She hadn't experienced anything like this for a long time, the joy of the selfless kindness of a complete stranger, but these feelings were unnecessary for her now. After all, she was about to return to her lonely life, and she gave Fatima another gold coin as a token of gratitude. Fatima was surprised, admitting that one cannot just wave gold around, and a girl traveling alone must be vigilant. Fatima was afraid that bad people might take away the money, and even ordinary people seeing gold might desire it. The heroine followed Fatima's advice, and an overwhelming feeling of fullness filled her empty heart. Perhaps Fatima would not have been so kind if she had found out that she was the same Haley from the rumors, and it is unlikely that she would have worried about her. Taking the heavy suitcase in her hands, Haley decided that she needed to quickly return to the little elf who couldn't stand being alone. But as soon as she approached the forest, creepy strangers appeared on her path and asked what the girl was doing alone in the forest at such a late hour. Haley was surprised, saying that she was going to go home and did not understand what was happening and whether it was robbers. The men said it was dangerous to walk along the road at such a time, and if the lady took a wrong turn, that evil magician from the forest would stick her in. Haley exhaled, and it looked like they were just locals returning late from work. One of the men asked how far the girl was going to go, and perhaps he could ask his wife to walk her at least to the crossroads. She refused help, but a local resident suggested that the girl take some grass that repels insects. Haley couldn't believe it. Everyone in this village was so kind, and according to the plot, bandits were supposed to show up here and take all the money. But this novel was especially blessed for the heroine, probably because she was not the main character. Or maybe she's just the main villain, Haley, who, while walking through the woods, suddenly heard her name. Right behind her stood Reichart, who for some reason was following the girl, although he should have been fast asleep. The lands were still saturated with dark magic, and Haley asked why the boy had followed her. After all, she left him on purpose and went away, and asked that from now on he go his own way. Suddenly, Haley asked him not to interfere in her poor and lonely life, and probably the young man did not expect to hear these words. The girl saw sparks of fire blazing nearby, and it was good that she discovered it before it was too late. Reichart didn't understand anything, as if it was a magical dream, and Haley only wanted him to live happily. The young man did not believe that the evil witch, who hated people and worshipped demons, held the hand of her enemy and wished him happiness. The soothing sounds of crickets and the smell of the forest still seemed to linger in the air, and this must have been an incredibly realistic dream. With Haley holding his hand every night, the boy's anxiety subsided, and he was able to indulge in a brief moment of daydreaming. It all turned out to be a dream, and when Reichart woke up, he remembered that he was going to go and buy a horse in the morning, but it seemed the sun had not yet risen. The young man woke up and saw a precious necklace with a pendant lying on his pillow. Reichart was afraid that this was all just a lie to calm him down. Fatima said that Haley had left urgently and was surprised that they had not said goodbye properly. All those numerous conversations that the heroes had while making their way through the magical energy were just lies to leave him to go alone. Each time, Haley offered to take his hand to cleanse him of the darkness so that her neck would turn into a zombie along the way. Reichart refused with all his might, realizing that if he took her small hand, there would be no turning back. Because even the last drop of doubt could disappear in his soul, but now it was all in vain. Haley didn't need Reichart. That's why she left him sleeping alone. The expression on her face was full of anger and confusion, and Reichart didn't understand why she had left on purpose. But Haley was sure that she had already shown enough mercy to the unfortunate character from the novel, and saved him from death, not allowing him to become a demon. Perhaps his family had no money, so she left behind a piece of jewelry and thought that would be enough. The young man could not understand why the lady decided to go back alone, simply leaving him in the tavern. Reichart shouted, was she really going to live alone in the contaminated zone forever, in a gloomy abandoned castle? He tried to convince the girl that it was absolutely impossible to live there, but the lady insisted that it was her home. She doesn't need him to understand her way of life, saying it's time for the young man to go his own way. Haley once became the enemy of the entire kingdom because of her karma, but Reichart was the ultimate victim. From the very beginning, they were nothing to each other, and nothing should change if they break up. He couldn't believe she had left him alone, and asked if it was also a lie that she couldn't read. Haley admitted that it was indeed a lie, and that was her cunning plan. She asked the young man not to be stubborn and just leave her alone, offering to provide one last favor. She stated that as soon as Reichart received the purification, he must immediately return the same way. The young man replied that it was easy for Haley to get rid of him, and it didn't matter whether he was cleansed or not. Haley was indignant. He probably didn't understand the seriousness of the situation, and he shouldn't try to persuade her. He refused to be cleansed, admitting that she was indeed right, and that they were just strangers, and there was no reason to be together. The heroine understood perfectly well that Reichart would die from infection, and he really wanted to die, but she saved his life. The young man screamed how many times she could have killed him, but did not, and he no longer knows if this is his life at all. After the storm, they walked in silence and walked on until the bright dawn broke. And all this time, the young man thought it would have been better if she had killed him then. Haley turned around every time and saw Reichart and turned around again, realizing that the young man was becoming more and more infected. Whatever he did, it was useless, and she wanted him to give up and go back. Ignoring him, she made it clear enough. But he still continued to follow her, while the infection slowly penetrated every cell of his body. At one point, the young man could not hold on and fell from exhaustion, and the lady rushed to his aid. Reichart simply did not know yet that even though his revenge had failed, another happiness was soon awaiting him. This time he will meet a real heroine, free himself from the shackles of a half-human, half-demon, and be able to start a full-fledged pink romance. It was impossible to continue to watch this neglect of the main character's duties. She asked him to leave and live happily. He continued to follow her, while the heroine screamed that she was no longer going to drag him back to the village. The young man's strength was almost exhausted, but he continued to stand his ground and only asked the girl not to interfere in my business. She called him by name, knew him from the very beginning, and Reichart asked if the memory loss was also a lie. And the fact that she couldn't read the map was most likely a lie too, but the most important thing is that she knows him. The heroine really didn't know about the magical hearth. I was told about it in the novels, and she didn't know how to explain that she wasn't real and hadn't just lost her memory. Perhaps if she told everything, Reichart would believe her, but at some point she got tired of all this. She no longer expected understanding, and declared that the young man could think as he wanted, and she did not expect to be understood. Haley didn't know what to say, and how she could even leave him if he wasn't even hers. Suddenly, the main characters knelt down right in front of the girl and declared that she could not leave him. The young man whispered something, but he didn't even have the strength to say it, and it turns out he simply fell down from exhaustion. Haley couldn't believe how this happened, because according to the script, everything should have been different. But she couldn't leave him in trouble, so she extended her hand to finally put the dots on everything. The heroine gave her name, Haley, and introduced herself as an evil black witch who destroyed his family and became the enemy of the three kingdoms. Suddenly, Reichart replied that he knew all about this very well and that it was nothing new to him. Haley wondered if the boy had remembered all this time and still continued to follow her. When she asked this question, a happy smile appeared on his face, and he confidently answered that he would still follow her. Reichart finally smiled for the first time, the bright smile of a protagonist whose fate was now full of suffering. Holding his hand, Haley finally admitted she was giving in and suggested they go home together as soon as possible. In a village on the northeastern edge of the kingdom of Kasnathura, strange events were taking place that day. They say that soldiers were sent to the border of the contaminated lands, and the locals were surprised at how many years no one cared. Rumor has it that the newly minted cardinal is young and full of enthusiasm, and he has personally traveled to all the borders of the three kingdoms. The cardinal's name was Eugene, and he personally distributed bread to the locals, but previously such tasks were entrusted to novices. He asked the lady not to worry, but even for him, patrolling such wilderness was not a cardinal's job. The order assessed the cardinal's actions as follows: he had risen too high for his age and was trying to live up to his position. But his assistant was sure that Eugene deserved more, and he should not be involved in such mundane matters at all. The cardinal's dream was to cleanse the contaminated lands and stop the inhumane and unjust expulsion of people. His knights carefully inspected the infected areas and also checked the lists of infected people seen in the northern regions over the past year. There was no one like Haley among the people, and the cardinal had probably been looking for her for a long time. The assistant asked the cardinal not to worry, and even if this evil entity was a powerful sorceress, she definitely could not survive there. Suddenly, one of the assistants ran up to him and said that they had found Reichart, the surviving member of the Winter family, and he had been seen running into the woods. Eugene understood that we were talking about the very family that Haley had cold-bloodedly destroyed, and he was like a beast eager to take revenge on her. They say that Reichart was very excited and was in a hurry to get somewhere, and he was the one who hated the villain with all his heart. The cardinal realized that the young man was ready to risk his life and go to the infected zone and asked to call the knights. He warned that everyone should go to Selbon village to search for Haley. The little forest spirit from Marin Castle thought that they were so poor that they would definitely not be able to feed one person. Haley admitted that she couldn't leave the young man, and it seems that now there are 3 of them in the castle. The heroine was afraid. She brought it without asking, and perhaps the forest spirit would be very angry. But the appearance of a new guest was not a priority for the forest spirit because he was incredibly happy when he saw flour, sugar, and butter. Haley asked them not to worry so much because there is a strong person who can do a lot for them. Perhaps the three of them will be even better off than in yours. Reichart was really very strong. The next second, the young man fell headfirst onto the ground, and the forest spirit declared that if he was weak, he should be driven out. After his return, Reichart was ill for a long time from overexertion, but there were no doctors here, and the heroes decided to believe that the young man would quickly recover. They discussed how to grow crops and make flour and what could be made from flour in the future. There was no mill or threshing machine here, and the forest spirit declared that all they had to do now was not to die of hunger. The little spirit had lived in the polluted gorge for 100 years, and he certainly didn't want to die. Suddenly, Haley felt uneasy and thought that the boy could not survive on the little food they were eating. She wondered what they would do once Reichart got better and started eating normally. But at that moment, the young man came out to them and said that he could get his own food. Haley laughed. "Thank you. How is he going to get food in the contaminated land, giving him a loaf of delicious bread?" The lady was indignant. Was the young man really going to go into the forest? Because in this way, he could become infected again. Reichart intended to hunt only in cleared areas, but there were only rats there. The young man assured her that he would be able to catch the game, and the heroine decided to see who he would catch this time. An hour later, Reichart succeeded in carrying out his plan, and soon he caught a rather plump bird. This was already the third game from the toy slingshot that the young man made from wood. Reichart had been cutting something out of a branch an hour before, while the heroine had been making fun of him, since the shape of the slingshot had been awkward at first. Soon he began to furiously obtain ingredients for dinner, and the strength of his body was truly his incredible ability. He quickly proved that he could feed more than just himself and caught many birds, so his situation changed completely. His voice, that of a man who had accomplished a feat, was gradually gaining power, and tomorrow he was going to conquer new territory. Haley wondered why he had decided to head towards Selbana'a, but the boy was going to make a wide road for her to pass through. He was sure that if there were supplies, they would have butter and flour, but Haley was afraid that if people found out that she was alive, they would simply execute her. She reminded Reichart that she had been declared an enemy of the three kingdoms, and everyone believed that she had been dead for a long time. And if even one living soul finds out about her existence, they will once again gather to execute her. Suddenly, the young man decided to ask why the lady did this, and their conversation became too tense. Haley knew he would definitely ask about it one day when he found out she remembered everything. He wanted to know about his family, why they poisoned the king, and it would be great if the real Haley was here, at least as a ghost, and answered this question. Now she could only convey the feelings of the heroine, which she read in the additional chapters. The man that the villainous Haley loved was a famous man named Sirill. Sirill wanted to be the heir to the family all his life. Perhaps it was love, but because the young man was born out of wedlock, he was neglected. And in order to make him the heir, Haley decided to accomplish a feat that no one else had ever managed to do, to destroy the Winter family, their enemy. Just love, that short and selfish impulse, led to the death of so many people, but now Haley did not want to die from a slingshot. The heroine couldn't change the past to her liking, and the real Haley loved this fool. The young man asked if she also loved Michaelin and Eugene, and these names were present in the additional heads. The heroine read about them in the text of the novel, but it was strange to hear these names from Reichart's lips. Eugene was a friend from the orphanage whom she considered her only family, and Michaelin was a true friend who shared the same soul with him. The young man laughed and said, "Is it possible, or did she get something mixed up? Because they not only grabbed her, but also put her in the dock." He called Haley stupid, and knowing all this, she pretended not to remember anything. Haley stated that she just wanted to survive because of someone who was eager to kill her even in a half-dead state. She asked why the young man pretended to have lost his memory, came to kill her, and then became kind. Reichart also just wanted to survive, and in this, he and the heroine were incredibly similar. Haley couldn't understand how he pretended to forget everything and was happy next to the person he was going to take revenge on. It was an unthinkable story, and now the heroine did not understand it because he was definitely going to kill her. She wanted to say that no one would touch Reichart here, but she had no right to make such speeches. After an awkward silence, the young man asked if she still loved the man for whom she had committed so many deaths. He asked about love, but the heroine could not sincerely answer this question because she was fake. First of all, she wasn't the real Haley, and she never said a word to these people. Suddenly, Reichart called her poor thing, and these words made the lady incredibly angry. He asked her not to pretend to be poor, and she could just remain an evil witch. He seemed to misunderstand her, but Reichart admitted that the villainous role suits her much better. That same evening, the heroine sat by the warm fireplace and thought that no one believed her excuses. Even the forest spirit looked at her with pity, but Haley understood that there were more important problems right now. Namely, that Taraya and Reichart somehow get along suspiciously well, the forest spirit is engaged in farming, and the young man is an excellent hunter. The heroine understood that if things continued like this, she would be the only parasite in this castle. If she had some down-to-earth skills, she could be more useful. The next second, the heroine was incredibly scared because a huge moth appeared right above the fireplace. It looked like a common moth, but the insect was the size of a bird, and she met its wings with her gaze. Older comrades in the army told me about a fairy they saw, but this moth was an ordinary insect. Haley decided to go to sleep in another room even though it was colder there, just to avoid meeting the moth. But a huge moth was flying straight towards her, and a bad feeling appeared which never deceived her. A loud scream was heard in the castle, and Haley was screaming in fear for Taraja's help. The forest spirit, along with Reichart, immediately came to the rescue, asking what had just happened. Right under the ceiling of the room, a blue magic ball was flying, and inside it was that very same moth. The heroine admitted that it was she who caught the insect, but most of all she was surprised, because it seemed that she had raised her level. It was about purification, and the girl's magical powers became much greater than they were just a day ago. After meeting the moth, her abilities rapidly increased. Now Haley could absorb magical energy even without direct contact with the infected area. Now she could clear a much larger area than before, and it felt like she was doing something unreal. The real magic had not yet begun, and upon entering the contaminated land, she decided to show how she could now extract magical energy. Now the magic was moving like her arms and legs. It looked powerful, and Haley looked like a real demon. Reichart asked if the girl had any other abilities. She still had one more new function. She saw a spider on a tree, and it was the one she needed, and the forest spirit asked if she was going to clean the insects. Wandering through infected areas, you often encounter creatures that have absorbed magical energies. These are creatures that have lost their vitality. This spider no longer spun webs or hunted, but if it was injected with a high concentration of magical energy, its jaw would grow as long as a fang. Haley directed her magic at the spider, and in an instant it was resurrected and transformed into another creature. The forest spirit was surprised because the lady really was the master of demons and could resurrect the infected. Perhaps it would work on animals and humans too, and theoretically, it was possible. Reichart offered to strengthen his body so that he could move around the contaminated area without fear of dying. Haley said that this was too much, and the boy definitely shouldn't become a demon just to go to the store. The forest spirit asked what about those who are not quite human, and he was probably talking about the infected. After all, if these people also become demons, like that spider, they will live and not die. There really was something in this unexpected thought. Dryad was right, and there were many innocent victims in this forest. Haley didn't understand, because this forest is mostly where criminals are thrown, and how can you tell who is innocent and who is a murderer? No one had the opportunity to get consent. Perhaps someone wanted the person to die, and did not have the right to do so. But Reichart insisted that these people would definitely want to live, even like this, because every person strives to survive. Probably Reichart now associated these people with himself, because he also did everything for the sake of survival. The forest spirit declared that it was enough to discuss human nature and dignity, and most importantly, they needed to continue living in the castle. In any case, Haley's growth was always a good thing, and he suggested that they discuss everything in the castle and continue the cleaning. Thanks to the intervention of the forest spirit, the conversation was ended, but doubts still remained. Would these people really want to live even after becoming demons? And if that's true, then it could be a second chance for the innocent. The most vile and fearsome demons among the original villains had human form, and it is possible that Haley selected infected criminals and turned them into demons. But one thing was absolutely clear to the heroine: she decided definitely not to use this power on other people. At that moment, she did not yet know that fate would bring her into a situation where her help would be needed. Not an hour had passed before her resolve and determination were again put to terrible tests. On the way to the castle, they met zombies, but suddenly Haley asked them not to kill them. She recognized them as the same woodcutters from the village of Selbon, but they had been fine last week. These were kind uncles who were worried that she was walking alone in the forest and warned her to be careful. One of the men even gave them medicinal herbs, but for some reason they were now walking around the forest, having turned into zombies. Haley didn't understand why the lumberjacks, who knew better than anyone about the dangers of the contaminated zone, would suddenly become infected en masse. There was clearly something wrong here, and the heroine excitedly reported that it seemed something had happened in the village. A few days after Haley's meeting with the woodcutters, a young man came to the tavern looking for the fugitive. He looked for a tall blonde man with a ball, probably with aristocratic manners, and asked Fatima if she had seen such a man lately. Fatima replied that even if it was a rural inn, she couldn't just talk about the guests. The cardinal's assistant took out a sword and threatened Fatima, saying that one of the 5 high-ranking cardinals stood before her. Eugene asked Fatima not to be afraid and told her that they were looking for a man named Reichart Winter. He said it was a dangerous business and he allegedly could not go into details, but the information he had was needed. After they left the tavern, Jenna was worried about whether she could trust the words of this innkeeper. The cardinal ordered the village to be completely closed and everyone who saw Winter and his companion to be found, checking every little thing. Jenna was surprised. The cardinal asked for a complete purge, and he was even ready to find the necessary pretext. Eugene ordered that those who resisted be sent to the infected lands and executed on the spot. Jenna immediately went to convey the order to the soldiers, while the cardinal was about to fulfill the will of the Almighty. Fatima said that Reichart met her in the forest by chance and saved some girl. She left late at night, and he ran after her. From the description, the cardinal immediately recognized Haley, despite the fact that she now had black hair. But he knew that Reichart was not one to help others for no reason, if he was in such a hurry to go deep into the infected lands. Haley may still be alive, but they said she was thrown into the ravine along with the great. Eugene guessed that she couldn't just die like that. A year had already passed, but she still hadn't come to him. He kissed his ring, and perhaps she misunderstood his true feelings, and he just prayed that she would wait a little longer. When they were little, the boy Eugene wanted to grow up together and leave the orphanage with Haley. Then, the girl believed that they were a real family, and only they could protect each other in any situation. Eugene promised the baby to always protect her, and Haley suggested cutting rings out of wood and exchanging them. It was a symbol of their vow to always be together, and the young man lived with these memories. The wooden rings spoke of the times when they were held together in this cold world only by each other's warmth. The heroes met woodcutters who turned into zombies 3 days after the village was closed, and for the girl, this was not an experiment that could be taken lightly. She understood that if she tried to clean them, they would die. Their important organs that worked on magic could stop. But turning these people into demons was out of the question. So Haley decided to first understand what had happened before making a decision. With the forest spirit's small feet, the journey would take at least 5 days, and he offered to stay. Apparently something serious had happened, and Haley and Reichart went to the village. Unlike last time, they encountered a busy border of contaminated lands filled with people. The heroes stopped at the cliff and watched what was happening, trying to make sure no one noticed them. Haley didn't understand why churches needed to be here, and why they needed to spend the night here instead of comfortable temples. Reichart suggested waiting until night and then moving, but suddenly he saw the girl freeze in place. She couldn't help but recognize this man at first glance, perhaps because he was now in Haley's body and his appearance seemed too bright. Eugene was the one who used Haley to rise to cardinal, and he was her classmate from the orphanage who she trusted. The young man had just suggested waiting until midnight, but suddenly decided to break through right now. Haley stopped him and said that they should wait because he wasn't going to leave her. It was at that moment that she felt his clear gaze sliding down the hillside, and the next second she met the eyes of the cardinal, who immediately recognized the girl at the top. The lady was frightened. They had definitely been noticed and immediately asked Reichart to go back. She confessed that there was a person downstairs who definitely shouldn't know that she was alive. But it was too late, and the cardinal looked at Haley with attention, immediately recognizing her. He was seriously going to shoot even at such a distance and ordered his assistants to catch the witch. Reichart realized they could get caught, and at that moment the heroine was overcome with hysterical laughter. She tried so hard to avoid meeting him, but for some reason Cardinal Vitamark was incredibly close. In the original story, the events are shown from the heroine's point of view, and nothing was known about the cardinal's movements. Arrows flew at the heroes, and Reichart diligently blocked them with his sword, holding the girl tightly by the waist. The cardinal shouted that no one should dare to let them go into the infected lands because the witch had to be caught. After embracing Reichart, they have one choice. The young man should hold her as tightly as possible and run deep into the forest. The young man didn't think long and hugged Haley tightly around the waist, intending to follow her instructions. If they manage to get into the infected lands, then none of the church ministers will pursue them. But at the very moment when the legs were ready to step into the infected lands, a sound was heard that was impossible to ignore. It was complete nonsense, and Jenna screamed, Fatima from the tavern would be killed if Haley dared to reject the church and choose life. The tied-up girl sat near the tree. Jenna screamed, this is what happened to the woman she gave the gold coin. Somehow everything turned out horribly, and Fatima is just a kind-hearted housewife who loves gold. But in the meantime, Fatima was desperately telling them with her eyes to run away, and this fantasy world was cruel to good people. This enraged the heroine, and she tried so hard to live in the shadows for so long, but as soon as she went outside once, the nightmare began. Haley didn't hear what the cardinal's assistant was muttering because dark magical power was already raging in her hands. Haley was no longer going to remain in the shadows and shouted loudly for the young man to take Fatima immediately. The infection spread very quickly, and people rushed to flee down the high mountain. The contaminated area neither grew nor shrank, and no one could understand what was happening. But soon, the villain Haley appeared, controlling dark magic, and no one could believe that this was possible. At that moment, the cardinal appeared below and shouted for Haley to stop and just talk to him. Eugene shouted the witch was clearly angry with him and asked to talk at least a little. Feeling like a real villain, Haley just burst out laughing when she heard the pleas for a conversation. After all, if the young man really wanted this, he certainly wouldn't have mocked defenseless people. And even more so, he would not turn innocent people into zombies against their will just to make the villain talk. He certainly wouldn't have done that to Haley in the first place if he had good feelings. But Haley knew everything perfectly well and asked the cardinal to leave these lands immediately. Haley hated the order. She ran away, unable to resist it precisely because of this man. But he still, like all the other hypocrites, testified that she was a villain, wanting to take away her magic. All this time, Haley didn't care who these people were, but if this is the case, everything changes. Even if it was revenge on behalf of the real Haley, she would be quite satisfied with it, and she turned to the cardinal. The heroine was just a reader who was deeply immersed in Haley's story. She got tired of crying out of pity for her, screaming, "From now on, these lands belong to her." And now she decided to take revenge on behalf of Haley, and in the end, the Order of the Holy Knights freed Fatima and left. For 4 days, while the heroes were returning to Marin Castle with Fatima, she cried constantly. All this time, Fatima was in great pain and fear, and she didn't even expect that Haley would turn out to be a sorceress. Fatima felt like she was in for something terrible when she saw the evil sorcerer and the heir to the duchy. Haley asked the young man to calm her down and suggested that she think everything over and that time was needed to accept the suddenly changed reality. She would like to help Fatima to ease her suffering in some way, sincerely, with anything. 3 days later, Fatima finally came to her senses and really hoped that they would live as members of one family. Haley said that she wanted to help in any way she could, but being one family was too much. But for some reason, Fatima decided to stay and live with them. She suggested moving to another city and starting over, promising to give Fatima some gold coins. But Fatima was afraid that she might be exposed. She had escaped from the Inquisition, and if she was caught again, she would definitely be executed. She was sure that the huge castle needed people to work, and she heard that the witch lady couldn't do anything at all. Haley said that life on the run was just disgusting, and Fatima could become a piece of trash who wouldn't even be able to openly say who he was anywhere. And does she really still want to stay here after this? Fatima admitted that she sincerely wants this. Her house was no longer there, her shop was gone, her hometown was gone, and it was very scary to start all over again in an unfamiliar place. Haley didn't even think about it. Fatima lived alone, but still she was with neighbors in her village. The lady was not very interested in worldly affairs, so she had no idea who Haley was. But she knew only one thing: the girl had saved her life, and she had militantly defended her territory. Haley marked the boundaries because it was a contaminated area, but Fatima called her Lord. It sounded pretty cool, and the heroes' lives changed dramatically, and soon the cries of geese could be heard throughout the yard. Reichart brought a wild duck that had laid eggs, and Fatima held them carefully in her hands. It didn't take Fatima long to settle in with the estate's inhabitants. She cried at night for the first few days, but quickly got back on her feet. And now she became an irreplaceable person in the castle, and every day she carefully served the heroes delicious food. Each time the forest elf tried a new dish, he asked Fatima never to leave and to live with them forever. Haley would also like Fatima to stay put and live here with them all the time. At dinner, Reichart asked the girl if she knew anything about the history of the contaminated zone. The young man assured that it would be good for the girl to know at least some of the basics, and decided to tell about the first chapter of this castle. Opinions about his identity varied. There was a version that he was a scientist obsessed with demonology, but it was also said that he was a warlock. It should be known that this land did not originally belong to any of the three kingdoms, but belonged to Marin at the time of the infection. So Reichart said that if the girl is the only Marin living in the contaminated zone, then the high castle and the lake are her territory. That is, it was a large land that belonged to no one, and the lady could well become its owner. This couldn't be. Could it be that the young man simply wants to please her? That's why he says sweet words. Now she could declare that this land belonged to her, and the contaminated zone was of no use to anyone. What happens then if the three kingdoms find out that Haley has cleared this place, and armies come from all sides to take it away? That's why Reichart was sure that it wouldn't be that easy for the three kingdoms to get here. If you think about it, in the original there were three kingdoms at war with each other: the kingdom of Holt, Neva, and Kaznathura. Three kingdoms of roughly equal military power in the original were constantly watching each other and plotting. And as soon as one tried to stick his nose in, the other two would definitely get angry, and to prevent this, the kingdoms made an agreement. Since the contaminated zone is Marin's private property, no one can claim ownership. And this is even certified by the church, and there are definitely no fools who would want to be the first to break the agreement. In fact, the heroine survived only thanks to this land and the cruel rules of the church. Thanks to this wonderful help, she now even received a title and lands that she never even dreamed of. Haley thought about it and realized that she was now a full-fledged marquise who did not have a single peasant on her lands. Haley laughed and told the forest spirit that she had one peasant, and that was Taraja. And Reichart was a full-fledged soldier who fought militantly against zombies and demons. Fatima laughed, admitting that in that case she was a full-fledged cook, and as expected, Fatima had ambitions. The heroine's mood immediately changed when she thought that the lands here now belonged only to her. And from a life in exile, where it was necessary to survive in limited conditions, the life of a manager now began. The situation hadn't changed, but the feeling was completely different, as if the game had acquired a new meaning. Reichart said that in old aristocratic families, when the previous head dies or retires, the heir gathers the vassals and declares himself head of the family. Although this was an old custom, in old families this ritual was obligatory. Haley loudly declared that she was ready to say something important, and Fatima began to listen attentively to the future lord. Taraja was sure the girl should be ashamed, but Haley was indignant these lands had not fallen from the sky to her. Here, only she bore the full name of Marin, and the lady confidently declared that from that day on she would become the sole heir of the Marquise Marin. Summer had arrived, blanketing the land in the warmth of the early season, and Marin Castle was bustling with life. Fatima commanded the ducks until the Marquise understood why she was doing this, because ducks definitely do not understand human speech. Reichart went to gather protein for the diet, and the forest spirit Taraja worked hard to restore the garden beds. The forest spirit watered the planted potatoes every day with special care and rejoiced at each new day. At times, he even resembled a Joseon-era mother-in-law who talked to her potatoes. The light breeze was pleasantly refreshing, and the sun was incredibly warm during the first days of summer. In the heroine's hand was clutching the last piece of fragrant bread baked from the remains of flour. Now the heroes must make a choice, either to return to the ascetic life of hermits, or risk their peace and go out into the world for provisions, and naturally all the heroes chose the second option. They say that the situation between the countries is tense now, but this was even to the heroes' advantage, and thanks to this, no one will even show their nose here. The less people from the state of Holt appeared in these forests, the less chance there was that they would be recognized. Following the clash in Selbon, the Kingdom of Holt has strengthened its border security in the infected area. According to Reichart, who went on reconnaissance, the story of the witch Haley has already spread throughout the country. Filled with great insight, he led the knights to stop the evil plans, but unfortunately many died in the process. And now people infected with dark magic turned into zombies and walked across the infected land, deprived of peace. That's how it sounded, but in reality it was all set up by the order to cover up the interrogations of the villagers. On the way, the heroes met two walking dead heads, and Reichart asked Fatima to check if there were any familiar faces among them. It seemed that these were not Selbon residents, and the zombies were dressed in clothes that were 100 years old. Now their death could be attributed to natural causes, but Haley asked Reichart not to touch them and decided to drive them away. In addition to the food problem, the heroes have another difficult task: how to distinguish real criminals from those who have been slandered. Finally, the heroes arrived in the city of Grandis, telling the guards that the lady's husband had cheated on her and fled here with his mistress. Fatima pointed to Haley, saying that the lady couldn't stand it and came to catch him personally. The guard admitted that this man was the most shameless person in the world, and the lady was an unhappy girl. The heroes used the pride of this country as a proven method, and even the main character of the original used it. But only Haley looked like a real aristocrat, and the guard asked who the young man who came with them was. This is exactly what Haley was afraid of, because if there was anyone among them who looked like an aristocrat, it was definitely not her. Reichart hugged the girl, and Fatima declared that this was the mistress's new lover, since she had decided to divorce her husband. In the Empire, one could only remarry after a divorce, and Fatima assured the guard that they needed to check everything. It looked like a real soap opera, and even the heroine herself would not have thought of acting like that. The guard confirmed that in order to marry a second time, one must first get divorced, and suggested that the heroes enter the city. He wished the lady a safe journey, and wished that she would definitely catch her impudent husband. Everything went just fine, and it was most likely a victory of spontaneity and Fatima's acting skills. The noisy crowd, the bustling city of Grandis, and every step along these streets spurred the desire to spend. The streets echoed with the sound of hammers from the workshops, and a sweet aroma was everywhere. Unplanned expenses were the ones that pulled the wallet out of the pocket, and none of the heroes could resist the temptation. The city sold rare products that were not found in the towns and villages, and they attracted attention. And so, unnoticed, a beautiful evening arrived, and the heroes decided to stay at the best hotel. Reichart had not been seen for a long time, but suddenly someone in the corridor shouted loudly for a doctor. Everyone came running to see what was happening, and right in the yard, the wounded men asked for a doctor to be brought. The young man screamed they were bitten by wolves in the forest, and loudly asked the locals for help. No one could believe that the hunters had been bitten by animals, but the locals' looks were too dismissive. Everyone knew it was definitely complete nonsense and asked the vile liars to get lost. Fatima couldn't believe it. A man was dying, and the locals were behaving like this, and everyone hated the people from Holt. Haley was a little upset why it had to happen here and now, and she actually knew why Neva was so angry at Holt. The local earl's wife loved to sell the skins of snow animals to the border town of Holt on the edge of the kingdom. But one day, when he was caught cheating and was on the verge of divorce, he hired hunters to get as many snow animals as possible for his wife. When they were promised mountains of gold, the hunters immediately invaded the foreign country, becoming poachers and destroying many animals. And now everyone who came from the Kingdom of Holt was arrested and interrogated, and the reason for it all was that count, the sworn enemy. Fatima was surprised how Mrs. Haley knew about everything, because she never even left the castle. The young men continued to plead that they had caught nothing and had not even seen a wolf or a boar. The ladies looked out the window, realizing that no one was going to help them, even if they died right on the hotel's doorstep. But Haley sat with her hands folded because she knew very well that soon that very person would appear, who will beg people to stop, assuring them that the Almighty commanded them to love even sinners. At that moment, a young man in a white robe appeared, who claimed that people should not be allowed to die, even if they had done evil, and this was the new hero in this story. The young man asked the locals for permission to take the hunters to a shelter and simply take care of them. The men looked with distrust at the stranger, who for some reason begged them to help the hunters, although he knew perfectly well that none of the locals would help. Fatima saw the young man's angelic character, as befits a servant. He tried to protect the innocent, and she dreamed that there would be such a person in their village too. But Haley destroyed her magical ideas in a second, and this young man was not a priest at all, but a real killer. Haley knew what kind of man this was, Rango the snow beast, the ultimate killer, raised by wolves, and he was really just going to kill the poachers tonight. Once upon a time, there lived a boy named Rango. He was abandoned at such a young age. He did not remember the faces of his parents, and he grew up in the arms of a white wolf. It may not have seemed wild to the human eye, but the memories of running through the snowy mountains with the wolves were the best of his childhood. His parents, brothers, friends were always there for him. He grew up in a wolf pack, and it was a happy life. One day, a terrible day came when the leader of the pack, his devoted parent, was killed by hunters who mistook Rango for a child kidnapped by wolves. The boy, who found himself in an alien world, resisted, but soon realized that his world was here, and he could never return to the pack of wolves. Eventually, Rango could not fit into human society and came to hate humans, and 10 years later, hearing of the massacre of white wolves, he joined Grandis to take revenge on those who had offended him. It was quite natural, and that was the story of the novel, but it had nothing to do with Haley. One day, Rango will meet the world's favorite main character, be saved by her, defeat poachers, and gain the loyalty of a fierce snow beast. For now, Haley had decided to enjoy the luxury for one night and return to her domain the next day, and it was definitely meant to be that way. The next day, Rango found the girl and asked if she would like a list of those who were abandoned in the contaminated zone. He asked Haley to destroy the poachers and in return promised to get a list of innocent people. Somehow, he managed to find out that Haley was indeed looking for people who had been unjustly abandoned in the contaminated zone. The heroine knew that Reichart was impatient, but she was surprised why the young man made such a decision without her knowledge and why he chose Rango. She made the decision to obtain the list of the infected on the way to Grandis, and on this short journey she passed through countless numbers of the corrupted. Haley had long thought that many zombies were just innocent victims like those lumberjacks and wanted to cleanse them, but was afraid that they would turn out to be terrible criminals. While she was hesitating, thinking about this, Reichart suggested finding out who had been thrown out and where, and reconsidering whether they should be cleaned out or not. Therefore, early in the morning, the young man confessed that this topic had been bothering the girl for a long time, and he decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and also save the poor snow animals. Haley's plan was to simply get some food and come back to check everything again, but not to involve Rango in her affairs. Rango met the villain before the main character and asked if Reichart was her subordinate. So, except for Fatima, that same day the 3 of them headed to the wolves' den before sunrise in order to get there on time. On the way, Reichart warned the lady not to drag herself along, but to strain her ankles, because in order to walk for a long time in the mountains, it is important to take care of your feet. Today, Haley looked tired. She had not slept well all night and had terrible nightmares. Last night in a dream, all the main characters were gathered in one place. The main character was nowhere to be seen, and even a minor character joined them. As the commander, Haley was supposed to lead the team, and she wanted a list that listed names, crimes, evidence, and the location where the person was dumped. The important document also had the administrator's signature on it, and Haley was surprised at how detailed Rango had been. Still, the heroine was tormented by doubts because it seemed to her that she was intercepting the luck of the main character, but it was unlikely that such an opportunity would arise again. Instead of the main character, doing a favor for Rango and getting a list of the names of the infected was quite a successful thing, and therefore Haley was seriously ready to cooperate. Rango was sure that even if they destroyed all the poachers in the mountains, there was no guarantee that others would not come from Holt, and these people needed to be scared, and the cold-blooded young man wanted to skin the people and send them to their families. His revenge sounded terrible. One day poachers caught his wolf family, skinned the animals, and then sold them for money. Haley thought the idea was just crazy, seeing the murderous look on Rango's face as he asked her not to lecture him. The girl found this journey tiring and difficult, and in the lands of Marin, filled with magic, she could climb the mountains for several days without getting tired, and without magic she became an ordinary person. Rango laughed. He was sure the girl would break down in the middle and cancel the order, but she had already come too far. He called her endurance top-notch, and he was not one to skimp on praise. Soon they managed to reach the closest place to the border, and beyond the valley there was a path that poachers usually followed. Until Rango met the heroes, he dreamed of simply killing the Count of Holt, because there would certainly be a reward for his head. Haley understood that the young man really couldn't cope alone, no matter how strong he was. In the original, the heroine meets Rango, badly wounded, immediately upon arriving in Grandis and heals him, and then learns the story of the snow beast. In fact, the main character was a member of a research team sent by Micklin, the King of Holt, and she was sent to solve this problem. Thanks to the meeting with Rango, the heroine found out the reason for the conflict between the two kingdoms, handed the unfaithful count over to court, and made the snow beast a symbol of reconciliation. After this, Rango must reform and become a loyal priest of the order. He volunteered to serve the main character, but ultimately died as expendable material for a tragic plot twist. Haley's principle was to not tie the protagonist to him, no matter what his ending, but now the deal was already made. She asked Reichart to catch 2 poachers, not too crippled, not too old, and not too young. And now she definitely had to intervene in the story of the plot, and for the young man the matter was not at all difficult. He asked Rango not to go anywhere and to look after his mistress so that nothing happened to her. Just think, Haley had to be left alone with this dangerous guy who, according to the plot of the novel, is the villain. The young man decided to ask why the girl needed to catch the poachers, since they could not be intimidated, and they knew that they could be idle and get the skin of a snow animal. Rango hid who he was, and at the same time constantly tried to find out the plans of Haley, who was sure that life was more important than money. She asked the young man to simply watch, and in any case, if the mission had failed, he would have already killed them. Rango realized that Haley knew something about him, although he thought she was just a rich aristocratic woman. Haley laughed when he said that she looked like a common aristocrat, and aristocracy certainly wasn't something you could just get. Rango knocked the hat off the girl's head, calling it a jester's cap, which seemed like a threat, but Haley also bites if you touch her. The young man found out that the girl knew about him, and she definitely approached him specifically because she needed something. But Haley knew that the ultimate killer was sitting in front of her, a child abandoned in the mountains and raised by wolves, and he was the main villain of this novel. The young man realized that the girl knew his identity. It was suspicious, and he was sure that he couldn't stay here for long. Rango pulled out his sword, but the lady said that he shouldn't have dealt with her subordinate like that. Before the young man could even take a breath, the lady unleashed a powerful spell on him, so incredible that Rango was sent flying to the side. Now he was just a killer who didn't even kill, but simply threatened, and Haley found it funny. Finally, Rango gave in, the hierarchy was established, and the heroine showed the main villain who was boss. For half a day, Haley enjoyed hiking in the mountains with a terrified Rango, until Reichart brought in 2 poachers, wolf fang jewelry, and a wolf cub's corpse on his back. It was clear at first glance that these were typical poachers, and they dared to use the cub to catch the mother. These people had absolutely no humanity and no moral principles. They were ready to do anything just to get the skin of an animal. Haley looked at the wolf cub's corpse in horror. Its paws were broken and she couldn't believe the pain the animal had experienced. Surely, while the poachers were carrying him, he desperately called for his mother, and the wolves, trying to save the howling cub, did not go far from the poachers. Rango angrily asked how they managed to catch a smart wolf. He knew that adults were difficult to track down. They killed her baby, were going to stuff it, and if it had survived, they would have simply sold it. One of the poachers asked who the young man was subordinate to, and probably someone hired him to catch them. Rango swung his sword, a feral rage flashing in his eyes, calling himself the human cub of the wolf they had once killed. He grabbed one of the poachers, swinging his blade, and wanted to kill him right there, but Reichart stopped him, saying that killing was not the best option. Rango's soul was filled with revenge, and he wanted to spend the rest of his days hunting poachers in the mountains in Odi. He shouted that he would also catch their families, break their legs, drag them along with him, and then everything would be fair. An enraged Rango was ready to create real chaos, but at that moment Haley intervened, confessing that she had a plan. In this story, the leader had to step forward, and the lady said if the poachers wanted to live, there was one way. With a slight wave of her hand, she created a magical purple ball and declared that it was simple: whoever eats it will survive and return home. One of the young men insisted that he had a wife and children, but the baby didn't even remember his face yet. His partner gave him away. It was a gross lie. The young man lived completely alone in a divorce, assuring that his mother was seriously ill. Each of them tried to play on pity, and Haley said that if his mother was ill, he needed to get back to her as soon as possible, and asked Reichart to untie his hands. The next second, the poacher's hands were free. He was happy. They were going to let him go so easily. Haley had a completely different plan. She put her hands on the poacher's head and ordered him to go to Holt. After all, they were the sponsors. The freed poacher ran headlong into the thicket of the forest, and he should have arrived in about 2 days. His partner was scared. The lady had clearly used magic and possibly injected him with a pollutant. Haley smiled, asked if the poacher really knows, and if he knows exactly what happens to those who are infected with it. She dealt with one villain, and his partner was scared, because if he came back, he would go after people. The lady offered the young man the only way out, to run ahead and tell him that his partner had become infected with darkness while hunting snow animals. She offered him payment for the service, ordering him to say that if his men got too close, they would all turn into infected zombies. With a trembling voice, the poacher asked the girl why she had started all this and who she really was. The city's Haley gave her name, Marquise Marin, and the young man ran into the depths of the infected forest to try to save his life. The mission was a complete success, and Haley was proud of her actions. She turned around and saw the frightened eyes of Rango, who definitely did not expect that this fragile girl could do such a thing. A few days later, the heroes decided to stay at Grandis's hotel for a while longer to make sure that the poachers had done their job well. All this time, Rango was afraid of Haley, calling her a scary woman and her actions incredibly creepy. The threats worked too well, and Rango no longer even went near her. Each time he was afraid the girl had put darkness in his food, but Haley said she had simply put the infection in the second poacher's mouth when he left. The first poacher should lose his mind in about a couple of days, and the second will need twice as long. The matter concerned dark magic. The Margrave of Holt would be forced to report it to the church, and there the connection with poaching would be revealed. Rango asked if the whole world revolved around Haley's whim, and what would happen if the church sent a bunch of paladins here. The poachers won't go there again, the rabbits won't be touched, and if the plan works, the only one who will lose is Haley, because Grandis will no longer be accessible. After thinking about everything that was happening, Haley realized that she definitely didn't want to play nice this time. On the same day, Margrave Holta sent ambassadors to the Grand and reported to the church about the expansion of the infected zone, asking for cooperation. But Lord Grandis responded categorically to this proposal and refused the Count's cooperation. If you translate the Lord's words, he asked to confess to poaching, and now the Margrave will not be able to get out of it easily. Haley was happy to realize that the mission was complete, and that what happened next was no longer her concern. She asked Rango to get the list, and warned that if he broke the agreement, she would do the same to him as she did to the poachers. The young man knew that it was dangerous to get involved with this girl, and he promised to keep his word. Some time passed after his words, and soon the very same list was lying on Haley's desk. He had to infiltrate the church with his superior skills, while Haley suspected he had the list from the beginning. Even if the list is a fake, it is impossible to verify now, and we will have to take Rango's word for it. Either way, the young man did a good job getting it, and it was a great deal. She thanked Rango for his cooperation, extended her hand to him, and the young man looked at the heroine with frightened eyes. He was afraid that now she would kill him, so that he would shut up, calling Haley the most terrible woman he had seen in his life. She even assumed that the young man wanted to kill her to keep her quiet, but Rango really just wanted to secretly follow. The boy went out through the door, but the killer had to climb through the windows, and this guy seemed to have no understanding of the fantasy world. Everything was settled with Rango. Haley got a big, sturdy cart and various products that will make her life better. The heroes finished their business and left Grandis, and 3 days later, they reached Marin Castle. Fatima and the little elf were incredibly happy with the fresh, tasty food, and after the storm, a rainbow finally came. Ms. Haley underwent an incredible transformation, and for the first time she appeared in a luxurious burgundy dress. Taraja called her costume a clown's costume, and Haley smiled because Fatima had chosen the gorgeous dress for her. When the elf first saw the lady in the dress, he thought that a demon doll was descending from the carriage. Fatima whispered, "Taraja better praise the lady," and she tried her best to appear beautiful. As a marchioness, Haley had absolutely no motivation to work, while Reichart assured her that she only got in the way in the kitchen and could not even bring anything. He even suggested that the girl go somewhere, but the Marquise was outraged at how he made her work. Sure, Haley made up an excuse to run away, but it's not entirely a lie that she's actually depressed. The list of exiles sent to the infected lands came into her hands faster than she expected, and Haley wondered if she could return the infected people to normal. The human body is very fragile. The slightest mistake can lead to biological death or turn a person into a demon, like that spider. Haley felt a huge responsibility and fear of the unknown, but no one else could do it. She needed to do something, so Haley decided to get the hair-thin magical energy and to practice on her body, because magic was completely harmless to her and could not harm her human cause. At first, it was incredibly difficult for the heroine, and she tried to feel the magical magic with her fingertips. But if she didn't concentrate, the magic would constantly break or dissipate, and Haley failed many times. The heroine was stubborn and persistent, and eventually managed to create a long black thread that wrapped around a thick blood vessel and returned to her. Now Haley tried to create several thinner threads, remembering the shapes stretching like a tree trunk so that she could control them freely, like her own limbs. After that day, as a result, the cleanings were concentrated until the heroine's nose started bleeding. She tried hard. And now Haley could control magic much more subtly than before, and Taraja, noticing the lady, did not understand where she was rushing to. So time passed, a sunny, warm summer came, and the little elf diligently grew the harvest. Finally, the right moment had arrived, and Haley declared that it was time for her and Reichart to go to Selbon again. A few months after Haley's departure, a grave crime occurred in the kingdom of Grandis. The Count dared to touch the protected animals of another state, and this was an unexpected event. This could have caused a conflict between the kingdoms, but the Order, under the pretext of investigating the contaminated territories, wanted the punishment to be put on the back burner. Eugene ordered an immediate announcement that the Order would investigate the matter. In addition, he ordered the Count, who was lying in wait for the people, to be brought to justice, and the surrounding mountainous territories to be declared closed to visitors. The young man asked the priest to tell him what happened to those people who saw the magic spread. One of the church ministers realized that it was time to tell Eugene the whole truth about what had happened. The first one discovered, as soon as it returned, was completely infected and tried to attack people. It was killed by soldiers. The second poacher who came to report him was captured and jailed, and is currently in prison. Upon hearing this, Eugene immediately declared that he needed to urgently meet with his poachers to ask them more about what had happened. He knew perfectly well that these people had definitely been in contact with Haley, and he still couldn't leave her alone. He wanted to know where she was, the one who had once captured his heart. Eugene met Haley in Selbon and remained there ever since, waiting for her. But no matter how long he waited, she did not return. The look of disdain on Haley's face before she turned away, her icy gaze, was still etched in the boy's memory. Then he wanted to say that this was a misunderstanding. In the past, he tried to save her and joined the Order as a cardinal, only to protect her. But he couldn't understand why she was there with Reichart, and they were clinging to each other as if they were close. Eugene knew that Reichart had always hated Haley. He was a beast who lived only for revenge, just like him. Shortly after this, an urgent message came from the state of Neva, which was reported by Assistant Jenna. Count Holta reported that magic from the infected zone was spreading abroad, and this worried him greatly. The spread of the infected zone is a deadly problem for everyone in the border region, and Eugene is surprised how the magic has spread so quickly. This had never happened in history, except for the meeting with Haley and Selbin, which happened quite recently. He ordered 2 paladins and soldiers to be left to watch the village, and asked them to deal with the rest on their own. Soon, Rango realized that everything happened exactly as the insidious Haley said. The Count was sent to the dock, and the habitat of the snow doors to the Forbidden Zone. The guys from the Order quickly ran around, but they only managed to find a corpse. It just so happened that Rango was just leaving prison after the poacher died. Haley warned that before the second poacher died from infection, the Order might try to take him under their wing. In any case, she was a terrible woman for him, but he knew that he had to keep the client's identity a secret until the very end. The arrival of the cardinal put the knights on alert, and the situation gradually escalated. Rango was thinking about going on a gastronomic journey, because there is a place in Holt where the food in the hotels is simply amazing. He tried to remember where it was, and realized it was definitely in the mountainous countryside, in that very village called Selbon, to which the heroes were now heading. The contaminated territory was vast, there were plenty of defiled people, and what was the likelihood of meeting again those who constantly moved in such a place? Therefore, the heroes decided to limit their search to the outskirts of Selbon and search for people for only 10 days. Luckily, the woodcutters remained in the same place where they were last seen. 3 months had already passed since the last meeting with them. Reichart did not even hope to see them, and Haley wondered if something was keeping them in this place. The border of the contaminated area was located next to a logging site and a hill with a beautiful view of the village. Perhaps the infected remembered their homeland. Haley tried not to be nervous, assuring herself that she had trained enough. She greeted the zombie lumberjacks and believed that these good people would definitely be cleansed. All this time, the heroine was painfully wondering whether it was worth cleaning them, but her life motto was to live like a dead person. But the more she thought about it, the more she didn't like the fact that people were abandoned so cruelly. That evening, when she fled from the village, the woodcutters lay in wait for her, and if they had not been so kind that day, none of this would have happened. So now Haley was going to help these people, and she put her hands on one of the woodcutters. The magical power flared with a bright glow, and the heroine was sure that now everything would be fine. Returning the infected to their previous state was hard and painstaking work. Not a drop, not a pinch of dark energy could be missed. Haley needed to extract the dark magic from her body, repeating the sensation 3 times so as not to damage anything. It took a lot of effort for Haley to gather her thoughts, and after a couple of minutes, she finally managed to get everyone back. The zombie lumberjacks turned back into humans, and with tears in their eyes, they looked at their savior. The men cried, feeling incredible relief, and each of them had never experienced such horror in their lives. Haley really did it. She was able to bring everyone back, and tears came to her eyes from joy for the experiences of the last months. This did not last long, and the squabble continued between the woodcutters, who were trying their best to thank her. The men really wanted to thank her, even offering to feed her a delicious dinner and give her all their savings. Haley refused, assuring that from that moment on their paths diverged, and they simply helped people get out of the contaminated area. These men turned out to be incredibly kind people. They were ready to give everything to save a life. The heroine did not want to be seen by the villagers. She was going to quickly accompany them and leave before dawn, but they encountered an unexpected situation. As soon as they arrived in the village, she realized with horror that all the houses were completely empty and that something terrible had happened in Selbon. The heroes decided to inspect the houses, which had clearly been recently looked after, but it looked like the locals had simply abandoned them. It is unclear where everyone went in the middle of the night, but the cardinal was not free enough to lock everyone up. Reichart immediately sensed an ominous atmosphere in the village and decided to find out what was going on, asking Haley to hide nearby. With a large crowd, they could easily attract the attention of the Order, and the heroes needed to leave the village as quickly as possible. But as soon as they reached the entrance to the village, an even stranger event happened. Suddenly, she heard Reichart's loud cry, asking Haley in a frightened voice to run as quickly as possible. She saw blood on the young man's clothes, and he was shouting loudly that it was necessary to urgently go to the contaminated zone. Reichart quickly grabbed her hand, saying that something strange had happened in Selbon and it looked like the Order was involved. One of the knights turned into a monster, and it was because of him that the village was turned into ruins, and the knights and soldiers of the Order fought, sparing no effort. It looks like they locked everyone in the temple because they need to hide the fact that the knight from the church turned into a real monster. The monster killed the knights and absorbed their strength, becoming only stronger, and the order was completely powerless. There were people in the church. They saw how Reichart cut off his head trying to save people. But this story did not have a happy ending. Despite the severed head, the monster rose again and chased the woodcutters and Haley. The young man could not believe why he cut off the monster's head, but the knight still remained alive. He asked the lumberjacks to run after Haley into the infected zone, and only in this way could the heroes save their lives. But most of all, Reichart was surprised when he saw that the monster in knight's armor was holding its head, which was still in place. It was indeed a magical monster, and the young man realized that a different approach was needed in this situation. His sword burst into flame, dispersing the darkness that had enveloped the monster, and with a dull thud the blade came down, cutting off the monster's head. The dark magic that held him in this world dissipated, and only an ugly head fell to the ground, from which black liquid oozed. He heard Haley's encouraging cries behind him, even though he had ordered her to run as far away as possible. But even the fall of his head did not end the nightmare. The magic of filth that permeated his being did not allow him to rest in peace. His sword rose into the air again, reflecting the last rays of the sun that were breaking through the gathering darkness. Reichart fought back, maneuvering with agility honed by years of training and countless battles. The battle continued, turning into a desperate dance of life and death in which hope hung by a thread, at risk of being swallowed up by eternal darkness. The crash of the fall sounded like a death knell in the silence that followed the fierce battle. Reichart managed to kill the monster imbued with dark magic, and the knight fell to the ground in bloody armor. He stood over his fallen enemy, watching as the last sparks of dark magic died out in the mangled armor. He hit the very heart, which was the key to victory, and the heroes stood silently over the corpse of the monster. There was demonic energy in his heart. It was incredibly abundant for an ordinary person. It was located in the heart of the knight, where the divine power that is granted at birth should flow, so the order collects children in whom it manifests and raises them from an early age. The most outstanding and powerful of them become Knights Templar, but from the heart of the knight came dark energy. After the desperate victory, Haley asked Reichart if life in the village would become even worse because of what happened. The entire order tried to wipe Selbin off the face of the earth in order to hush up the terrible incident. And Haley knew there was nothing she could do, and innocent people needed her help again. After a terrible incident, the village of Selbin was turned upside down, and people's lives will never be the same again. And this is not surprising. Just recently a trial was held in the city, and now the paladin has turned into a monster and committed a massacre. The locals were freed, and the monster was destroyed, but Haley was sure that people should always be prepared for the worst tragedies. Reichart said that they say that 2 paladins died, and all the other soldiers fled without a trace. He looked at the warlike girl and asked what plan awaited them next. Haley definitely had ideas about what they should do next, but she was afraid of only one thing, so that they would not be disturbed by another person who was already familiar with them and had once helped them. They had to meet this man again, although only a little time had passed since their last meeting. Haley decided to choose Rango as her assistant, and she was sure that they would succeed again. Reichart had to tie up the boy while he was screaming he was being treated too harshly. They had entered his house, and after their recent departure, the churchmen had proliferated in Grandis, and it had become difficult for Rango to make a living. The young man was going to live quietly for a while, but a monster appeared and everyone was locked in the temple. Haley immediately declared that it was necessary to find one person, but the young man did not even have time to refuse, seeing a bag with a reward in front of him. She was going to find the young cardinal from the order, Eugene, but it was from him that Rango fled into this wilderness 2 months ago. It was around the time Haley went grocery shopping and Rango couldn't believe it. The girl gave him a 100-year-old gold coin. She immediately gave him the payment and asked him to go to Grandis as soon as possible, report what had happened in the village, and convey that she would like to meet him. A week later, Eugene was supposed to come alone, unaccompanied, to the village sawmill. Haley asked me to tell you that this is Eugene's last chance to talk to Haley Marin, and if he misses it, he will never see her again. That very day turned out to be with a particularly strong snowstorm, when the past heroine asked the young man to hide her for a few days. One day she begged Eugene to let her stay and promised that as soon as her mother recovered, she would go far away and never return. It happened 2 years ago in the cold, bitter winter, and Haley, persecuted for poisoning King Holt, came to his home. Eugene was outraged by Haley's appearance, insisting that she go to her lover and ask him for help. He promised to come forward with a statement so that Haley could appear in court and plead guilty. Eugene wanted to state that the sorceress Haley was deceived by Sirill, and she definitely did not destroy the Winter family, and did not kill the legitimate heir of Bandition. And it certainly wasn't Haley who poisoned King Holt, and in fact it was Miquelon and his mother who were involved. Haley excitedly screamed for the young man to shut up and never interfere in her affairs again. And she certainly didn't do it for the sake of gratitude, and if the truth comes out, and Haley has self-satisfaction from the fact that she sacrificed herself for them, then the heroine was very confused, but she knew one thing: she did not want to be used and thrown into the trash. Haley knew in her mind that she had been betrayed and abandoned, but she refused to admit it, even if death awaited her in the future. Eugene took advantage of the situation, and Haley was always weak before his tears. The future cardinal cried, assuring her that he would not be able to live after her death, and did she really not care at all? He was sure that Haley would hug him and calm him down as always, and this time, as usual, she would not be able to refuse. But that day the girl made a serious statement it would be better for her to die than to link her fate with Eugene. Haley didn't ask him to understand, didn't ask him to save her, she just begged him to hide her for a few days. Then he finally realized that cruel Haley had decided to leave him until the very end, so he asked her to leave. If she was caught, it would be her problem. The villainess who once gave her love did not believe that Eugene could do such a thing, calling her his family. She couldn't accept the fact that the young man simply refused when she was no longer comfortable. Eugene insisted that he loved her, even when she said that she had feelings for Sirill, and even when she made a pact with Miquelon. With tears in his eyes, he admitted that he still desperately loved Haley, no matter what. They once decided that they would never betray each other, no matter what happened. But Haley left Eugene and found herself in the arms of another man. He considered her a traitor, while Haley asked her to think about her decision, because he was the only person she could rely on. But that couple no longer existed, who considered each other to be themselves, and who could always rely on each other. In one moment, the love story shattered into tiny pieces, and Eugene kicked Haley out, asking her never to come again. He sent her to the man she loved and asked her to lean on him, warning her that family games were now over. Having read the original, Haley knew that Eugene regretted that day and how obsessive and selfish his attachment had been. The main villain of the novel never found out about this madness, and in one moment was simply abandoned. In Haley's heart, Eugene has always been a little puppy who needs to be taken care of, who has no responsibility and who can do no wrong. The young man's position was quite simple: the other person was to blame for everything. But unfortunately, the new Haley did not think so. This puppy has long since grown up and become a grown man, and it's time to repay for the care. Haley kept an eye on the meeting place, but Eugene must have forgotten the terms of the deal since he came with his priest. The heroine thought that Rango was serving the cardinal and that he had been deceiving her all this time. But Rango suddenly screamed, "He is a snow beast," and he was taken hostage by the cardinal, asking for help from the demon duchess. Indeed, his hands were tied, and the cardinal, in all his anger, pushed Rango straight to the ground. Eugene was waiting in advance because the poacher who was being held in the dungeon had been killed by someone, and he was sure that his ex-lover was behind it. The cardinal approached the girl, finding himself too close to her, and she felt his breath. Haley certainly didn't expect this turn of events, because then Eugene hugged her tenderly, confessing that he had missed her for a long time. Haley screamed, finding the hug too disgusting, and asked the cardinal to remove his hands immediately. Only she knew that she was not the cardinal's true lover, but a completely different person. Her plea was heard. The next second, Reichart appeared and grabbed the young man by the collar. He was indignant. Did the cardinal really not understand the meaning of the dialogue, and asked him to leave his mistress alone? The situation seemed too intriguing, the priest who follows the gods hugging the demonic marquise. The lady asked Reichart to take Rango away, and asked Eugene never to touch her again without permission. The cardinal has proven to be even more persistent than Reichart, and he may try to unilaterally restore the previous distance. Here, Haley must be ruthlessly firm, but the cardinal asked for a chance to apologize. Eugene admitted that for many years he regretted that day again and again, so he continued to look for Haley and believed that she was alive. He was ready to do anything if Haley wanted it, leave the church, or even kill Sirill and McLean. Eugene was more accommodating than Haley had expected, but she was no real heroine, and there was no point. She admitted that she had not invited the cardinal here to reminisce about the past. The demon lord actually called Eugene to fulfill one of her requests. Apparently, Rango had conveyed to Eugene everything that had happened in the village well, as she had asked, and all that was left was to add a few clarifications. The heart that was supposed to be filled with sacred power was found to be infected with dark magic, and it was an artificially created artifact inside the church. According to the young man, he really had nothing to do with this, and probably others do not particularly trust the newly minted cardinal. Eugene was sure that if Haley's words were true, the church was ready to burn the entire village to cover it up. And that was exactly what the cardinal had to do, to prevent the church from touching the people of Selbon. Haley asked to announce that the Marquise Marin was behind all this and the evil sorceress created a demon this time. The cardinal was against it. It would tarnish Haley's reputation. She knew if the truth didn't come out, the church wouldn't destroy the village. The young man agreed, and since he came here alone, as they had agreed, he was ready to follow the instructions of his former lover. Haley asked what Eugene was going to talk about, how he used her and then abandoned her, or how he proposed to deprive her of mana and throw her into the contaminated lands. The young man wanted to explain the misunderstanding and asked Haley to give him the opportunity, assuring him that everything was done for her protection. Without mana, people would stop fearing her and stop chasing her, and this was the case when the three kingdoms wanted to execute her. He assured he risked his life, convincing the church and persuading it is better to send it to the infected lands. Eugene was sure that Haley was a strong girl and she would survive even on the most terrible land. His words sounded like absolute nonsense, and Haley was stupid because these words were spoken by the man she considered her only family. She asked the cardinal to come to his senses, asking if he still didn't understand what he had done. Haley had nothing but magic, no lovers, no friends, no family, and even when she thought she had it all was all a lie. Magic was the only shield, the only power that belonged to her completely. The cardinal took away even that magic from Haley, and even though she is now called a demon, she has powers that have become her protector. Eugene continued to insist that there was a necessary sacrifice, and he had to stop those who demanded that she be burned alive. In response, Haley decided to remind him how the young man became a cardinal, and he probably forgot everything she did for him. After all, it was she who helped obtain the title of cardinal, caused floods, spread diseases, and killed people. And Eugene simply took their place and became a holy miracle worker, although he never really was one. Haley asked him to admit that he had betrayed her because his love was not appreciated, and asked him to throw out the hypocritical nonsense about protection. At that moment, she wanted to tell the whole truth. His beloved had died long ago in the Marin castle. She chose death, eaten away by hatred and betrayal, left completely alone. Eugene knew Haley very well and thought she would survive in the contaminated lands, but he did not understand that she would not be able to bear the loneliness and heart-corroding pain. The young man gently touched the girl's sleeve, admitting that he was wrong and was ready to apologize hundreds, thousands of times until she forgave him. If he had a chance for forgiveness, he was ready to wait even for decades, kneel down, and give his life. Haley screamed. She didn't want his life at all, and asked him to stop talking this painful nonsense. All this time, Reichart listened attentively to their conversation, while Haley asked the cardinal to stop whining. She said that it was better for the young man to develop independence, because he would have to survive in this cruel world. After the harsh words, the young man fell into despair and asked his former lover not to speak like that again. He begged that he would no longer be selfish, offering to become a family again, and was ready to do everything as Haley wished. This novel had made the male characters unbearably beautiful on purpose, and now the heroine understood why Haley couldn't resist his tears. She was not Eugene's family, not the girl who had warmed herself back to back with him in the cold shelter. Haley, who had killed people and done evil, was dead, and there was no connection or grudge between her and the cardinal. She asked him not to worry, promising that he would soon find true love. And since this young man was the least vile of the three main characters, she said that he would become the third husband of one woman. In the future, the young man will be tormented by jealousy, but he must come to terms with it, and this is his true destiny. Eugene was hardly ready to accept her prophecy, but he accepted the initial offer and remained in the village. Without the paladin's body, the investigation will be difficult, but the cardinal has promised to prevent any more executions here. But he warned that the woodcutters could not remain in the village. Too many people knew that they had been infected. And if word gets out that Haley is purging the afflicted and taking them with her, the church will weave an even tighter net to catch her. In that case, Haley promised to simply take the woodcutters with her to Marin Castle. The cardinal was surprised. "Is it really possible to live there?" the heroine said with joy. "In any case, it is better in the castle than outside. There is no freedom of movement or abundance of supplies in Marin Castle, and it is a place where only those who have been turned away by the world can hide. And no one would want to come here voluntarily and live, except perhaps a few heroes." But to Haley's great surprise, locals were happy to offer their help with cleaning and laundry. Fatima lived here, many people knew her, and the kitchen was full of work for other people. Many were grateful to serve the castle, and the ladies from the village happily bustled about in the kitchen. Soon the family grew, but initially the heroine did not even want to think about accepting people as residents of the estate. Reichart reported that secret documents were stolen from the order, and after that the city was turned upside down. Rango noticed that these were probably the secret documents that the Demon Duchess asked him to steal. To summarize the report of Reichart, who returned from reconnaissance, one cannot dream of moving to Grandis. Haley planned to drop everything and return to the castle, but she could not bring the villagers back. If it becomes known that the lumberjacks have returned from the contaminated zone, it is unknown what the order will do with them. Haley grabbed her head, not understanding at what point everything turned out like this, because everything was going according to plan. The men did not understand where they should go in this case, and it was definitely impossible to return to the village. Haley smiled and suggested that they just go home first, inviting them to her estate. It so happened that the man and his family temporarily settled in the castle of Marin, and they clearly intended to settle here. Reichart asked the girl to accept everything with gratitude, but she did not understand why she should take on work that no one asked for. One day, the heroine extended a helping hand to them, which is why people wanted to repay her with kindness. On the one hand, Haley understood everything perfectly well and was glad that Fatima and her friends were okay. Fatima said that the lady had been taking care of her all this time, and while everything was happening, her aunt had become completely emaciated. The lady saved her husband's life, and the aunt assured them that they could not just sit on her neck. Fatima happily offered to help with preserving the food, and a happy smile shone on her face. Haley understood that people were simply grateful and not doing it for any benefit. But the fact that Reichart was saying the right things somehow irritated her incredibly. Meanwhile, the lonely spirit cleverly manipulated people, assuring them that he understood nothing at all about agriculture. In fact, he just wanted attention, and the people from the village were surprised how he was able to grow juicy strawberries on hard, dry soil. The soil was really not very suitable for a vegetable garden. It had too much sand in it. One girl suggested setting up agricultural land outside the castle walls. Thus, the hands of the suddenly appeared inhabitants of the castle reached all its corners. Freshly planted crops were located on more fertile land, and the castle of Marin was transformed. Haley admitted that people had made some good changes to the castle, but she wasn't sure it was a good place to live with children. In a cozy castle whose only purpose was isolation from the world, she could not guarantee any future. One day, Haley noticed men repairing her bedroom window, which had been shaking all night due to the wind. They were going to repair the walls, then build a house where they would live, not wanting to go anywhere. The woodcutters said it was better to stay here, because if they left, they would have to run away from the sect. The men assured her that it would also be better for the lady to live with her family in the hustle and bustle than to be alone forever. And the window, which had been sealed shut every time from the rain, now opened smoothly and did not make any terrible sounds. Haley still thought that 4 people were enough for the Marin Castle family, but she thanked the new residents every time. The men were only too happy to help the lady and were embarrassed every time by her words of gratitude. There was a constant joyful smile on their faces because now they were all together again. Reichart asked the lady to come downstairs, saying there was a more urgent project instead of building houses. The young man proposed to build a bridge over the cliff that would lead directly to the border of Casnatura. Rango thought for a long time that he shouldn't have gotten involved with the sinister woman, but he only just woke up and already accepted money from her. He was sure that the innocent lumberjacks didn't know what kind of woman Haley was, which was why they, with their sweet eyes, borrowed her gold so easily. But for those who live in the darkness constantly, like the young man, Haley's name needs to be imprinted in the mind and never forgotten. Although rumors and reality did not match up a little, and to be honest, Rango saw this girl from a different side. He insisted that even casual meetings were canceled, assuring her that he should under no circumstances go with her. Rango wondered what other devious trick the lady had in mind, knowing that she would pay handsomely for it. Haley asked to find out about the fake knight that the church created and sent to the village. As far as the young man remembered, the Marquise asked to find out information, but did not tell him to act secretly. But since it came to that, in that case he decided to blow the matter up for his own interest. The woman Haley was worried about was named Asta, and she was a girl with pink hair and a peach face. She warned Rango to avoid her. It was about the princess, and the heroine was going to do all the work for her. Rango didn't know what Haley meant by work, but for some reason the princess bothered her a lot. The lost princess of Casnathura, a sweet girl with huge pink eyes and silky hair. In the kingdom of Casnathura, for a long time, there was only one royal offspring left. The king was supposed to have a son and a daughter. He experienced a tragedy and lost a little girl. The young princess secretly left the palace to watch the festival but never returned. The king spent many years feeling guilty, but 12 years later he miraculously found her in an orphanage he accidentally visited. The princess they found turned out to be the only elementalist in the world, and she couldn't believe that humans had blocked off and controlled the city. Princess Asta was outraged by how people abused their power, crossing all boundaries. The heir of the Benditian family, Sirill, was sure that if the thief was experienced enough, he would have left the city, and the order was clearly hiding something about the stolen documents. Grandis, a suburban town, was blocked due to the theft of top-secret documents. The reason they were here, the recent incident, the excessive hunting of snow animals organized by Holt, was proven. The incident, which almost caused discord between the kingdoms, was entrusted to the Princess of Casnatur to resolve. But when she arrived there, the problem had already been solved by a certain demonic marquise. The princess needed to return home. Her family did not know that she was here, so Sirill offered to help the girl. At that moment, he received an important message. People from the main house arrived and said that the head of the family was calling him. His hand clenched into a fist because Sirill understood perfectly well that the head of the family could not just call him. He was afraid of completely disgracing himself, and after apologizing to the princess for interrupting the conversation, he left the office. Asta saw the worried face of the young man and warned him that if he ever needed help, he could just say so. Sirill didn't want to involve the princess and simply asked to be with him at that time. Now his long-standing torment about his origin was being resolved, and the young man learned that for him it was a waste of time. With these words he left the office, and the excited princess remained alone. Asta could understand the pain Sirill was going through, and he probably had a lot of worries about his origins. The stigma of an orphan that seemed to haunt the girl her entire life, the times when she had to endure everything alone, without a warm family. But now everything has changed. The princess has a precious family that she found again, and good friends, thanks to whom she could forget about the difficult times. So the princess decided to no longer lock herself in the cave in her heart and not remember the tragedy, and the world that was cold to her now turned out to be warm and beautiful. At one diner, her assistant booked a wonderful seat and offered to have something tasty to eat. At the next table, loud voices of men could be heard who were discussing something heatedly. It was about the young heir of the Benditian house, who had spent his whole life as a bastard, and in the blink of an eye took the place of the heir. One of the interlocutors, according to him, had the opportunity to see the young gentleman from afar, and not everyone is given the ability to hold on to a terrible woman. The assistant warned the princess not to take words to heart, and they say the young master tried to stop that woman. But the witch sold her soul to the devil. Nothing could be done, and at that moment the princess became interested in this girl Haley. Her friends said that no one had ever survived leaving the contaminated zone, and if she had lived, the rumors that she was the daughter of the devil were true. In order to get information, Rango was just in this establishment and realized that suspicions arose from tiny rumors. Reichart and the Marquise came to the south of the infected forest to build a new bridge and tried to find a safe area good for carriages to pass through. Haley was worried about risking the threat of enemy invasion, but the young man was sure that the real threat was the food problem. Their family had recently tripled in size, they had small children to feed, and the crops would take a long time to grow. There were other villages nearby. The heroes needed large quantities. If they did not get enough food, things would be bad. South Kasnatura was the best option, and would be the most convenient area for trading if the flooding could be overcome. After listening to all of Reichart's arguments, Haley finally agreed to build the bridge. Thus, the decision to create a cult of demons was born, and thanks to the experience of the woodcutters, the construction went smoothly. But most of all, the 100-year-old elf was happy about this construction, and he thought that he would have to take care of Haley alone. Toraja had a tragic life, becoming infected with a spirit in the contaminated zone and meeting Haley despite her horrible story of being connected to the devil. Now he was glad that there was somewhere to get meat and butter, and all the inhabitants of the estate would be fed. The little elf was always content with little, and Haley asked if he had ever tried bœuf bourguignon. It was a very tasty dish, beef, butter, and tomato soup, and the elf's mouth began to water at the words. Haley promised that next time they came back, she would definitely ask Fatima to cook this dish. Reichart and Haley decided to go out into the city again to replenish their food supplies and buy materials for building the bridge. But first of all, Haley wanted to get the necessary ingredients for the dish she promised to cook for the elf. A few days later, the heroes reached Grandis easier than last time, and the journey took no more than 2 days. To get into the city, they gave themselves different names, and the guard even checked their passports. Haley thanked the guard for his hard work, and now the heroes were named Zeus and Hera. They took the names of Greek gods as pseudonyms, and initially Haley wanted to be a hero, but something went wrong during the forgery of the ID card, and Reichart decided to take the name Hera for himself. Reichart was stubborn, the picture turned out strange, but the heroes got into the city without any problems, going to the grocery store for ingredients. It was then, on a lazy summer day, that a sharp, strong wind blew across the quiet Grandis. A large bird appeared, tearing through the sky with the wind, a familiar image to Haley, which appeared on the cover of the original novel. The heroine looked with eyes full of admiration at the spirit of the bird Ventus, and this meant that the bird was in the city. But this bird symbolized only one thing: the main character is here now. With the description of pink hair and a pretty face, the princess was a favorite heroine until reading Haley's side story. When she saw her appearance, she couldn't hold back her strong emotions because Asta Rosa was really right next to her. Haley confessed to Reichart that there was someone who was very kind but harmful to her, and perhaps this person would pass her by. She asked the young man to listen carefully, and now her words were extremely important. There was talk of unholy magical power, and at that moment a huge white bird flew towards the heroes. Haley screamed in surprise as the magical bird came straight towards them. The girl shouted for him to stun that woman immediately, and only then would the bird disappear. It was necessary to act very quickly, and weakness of spirit was the vulnerable point of the princess and her bird. The young man clapped his hands loudly as the magical bird tried to protect the princess. This act could be called vile, but the heroes had no other choice. Haley asked Reichart to run as quickly as possible, but for some reason he put the Astu on his shoulders. Unfortunately, they had already managed to attract too much attention, and local residents began to call the guards. Things went completely wrong, and trying to avoid punishment, the heroes kidnapped the main character. They stole the girl who was originally supposed to be Reichart's passionate love. Now they were standing in the cemetery. Haley was trying to explain that it wasn't this woman who attacked her, but her spirit bird. The young man was confused, and it turned out that he had just attacked an innocent lady. That bird is Ventus, the spirit king, the spirit bird, and the princess was his contractor. Spirits hate those who are corrupted by magical energy, and the bird must have been able to sense the magic, and most likely it will continue to rush at Haley, expressing its anger with its whole body. Reichart suggested killing this girl, but he didn't know that she was the lost princess. If it weren't for this incident, Haley would never have been able to see Asta, and she was her favorite character. Perhaps because she wanted to be loved like a child, the princess was liked much more than the other heroes, and in real life she turned out to be even more beautiful. Haley touched the girl's face with her hand, realizing that it would be better if she inhabited her body. Reichart asked the lady not to behave like an impudent lady, and at that moment the princess woke up. Haley asked the girl to calm down. She didn't mean to hurt her, but if the spirit appeared, you would be noisy again. The princess did not understand why she had been kidnapped, and the Marquise immediately gave her name, and Reichart introduced himself as her henchman. As expected, a beautiful face even just woke up, and it seemed like the princess was very scared. Since Haley met the princess, she decided to help with the main role, the stupidly fair and sweet main character. According to the original plot, by this time the princess should have already become famous throughout all 3 kingdoms. The wise princess who stopped the conflict of the snow beasts, the only spirit caster in the world who defeated the demon. With titles like that, she should have become very popular, but because of Haley in the original storyline, she lost that. The most important event that will make the princess a saint will happen very soon, when a demon appears in the Kasnathura forest. Haley warned that if the princess was late, he might show up in full uniform, and the princess definitely didn't belong there, because her goal was to save the world. While Asta would protect the world, the Marquise was going to hide in Marin Castle. She warned that she had kidnapped the princess to report this, and Saint Asta must defeat the demon. The princess didn't understand anything and asked Haley not to leave, because she had just said some nonsense about saving the world. A childish manner of speech, like that of a fairy from a fairy tale, and a look too indifferent for a cruel kidnapper. Asta didn't know who the Marquise Marin was and why she had appeared so unexpectedly in her life. At that moment, a stranger appeared in the abandoned cemetery and asked the princess what she was doing there. He said it was an abandoned cemetery, and girls like her shouldn't go there. The young man said that this was a job for excommunicated priests like him, looking after the graves of those who had no relatives. The heroes had to open the sarcophagus, and the young man wondered who dared to do this without his knowledge. Asta said that in fact she was kidnapped, and when she woke up, she found herself in this cemetery. The young man warned that tomorrow morning it was necessary to go to the right to report a search, but the princess was not harmed, and she assured that everything was completely fine with her. She only asked the young man to take her outside, thanking the priest for his kind help. Looking around, the princess thought, the young man is taking care of an abandoned cemetery which no one pays attention to, and if he became a priest at such a young age, he must have been connected with the order from childhood. She decided to find out how this happened. The young man confessed. He tried to investigate the crime. Because of this, he was deprived of his name and expelled. He couldn't fight alone, so he just prayed here in the cemetery, and this story sounded incredible. Even if the young priest's story was a lie, it was clear that the Order's recent actions had caused discontent. It might be a risky venture, but Asta assumed that together with this man, it would be able to unravel the secrets of the Order. Asta couldn't cross the border because she couldn't reveal her identity, but she needed to return to her homeland as soon as possible. She asked the young man to help her get out of Grandis and promised to find out if it was possible to restore the title of priest. The princess offered to help each other and asked to go with her, because there must be at least someone who tells the truth. The priest swore his life, promising to definitely bring the princess out, and now the girl no longer had to risk her life. At this point, Rango finally became part of the main characters group from the original work. In the end, the heroes did not get anything they needed, and dark night had already fallen over the city. All the shops were closed and it was getting late, so Reichart suggested that Haley rest today and set out tomorrow. He decided to ask. At first, the lady did not plan to kidnap the princess, but for some reason she said something like, "Go and save the world." It was just improvisation, because Haley couldn't say she did it for more than an hour, because some crazy bird was trying to kill her. Besides, Asta was supposed to receive an offer from Michaelin and become a saint, but at that moment, Haley stopped and froze in place. And her main mistake was meeting a young man with whom she was very well acquainted in a past life. If Asta was in Grandis, Haley should have known that this guy would definitely be here too. The man that Haley loved with all her heart, named Sirill, was now standing right before her eyes. Reichart reacted very quickly, grabbing his sword as he sensed they were in danger. Sirill immediately rushed into the attack as soon as he saw Reichart on the street of the dark town. If you think about it, the boys were originally enemies. The heroine did not understand what kind of habit it was to immediately grab a sword when meeting. the victim who lost her entire family and clan in one night, and the instigator who used Heli to destroy Winter's house. Haley tried to hide behind the nearest building so that Sirill would not notice her presence under any circumstances. After all, if she thoughtlessly rushes to help and releases magical energy right in the center of the city, she will again become an enemy of the Three Kingdoms and lose her head. While the boys fought, Haley hid nearby and heard only the loud cries of struggle. Reichart said that it turns out that Dirty Sirill is looking for a new woman in the dark alleys to ride. Sirill was indignant. His enemy was talking too much and was unable to die with dignity on the battlefield. The young man replied that Sirill had no right to talk about honor, and he could not win without the woman he was using. They say that Sirill still hasn't been able to take over the house and destroyed the Reichart family, but still ended up with nothing. The verbal altercation between the enemies continued, and Reichart was sure that when the young man found himself in a deplorable situation, he remembered him. And that same evil witch was standing right around the corner, while Reichart was trying to figure out how he seduced Haley. He continued to insult Sirill, calling his behavior trashy, and asked if the Princess of Kasnathura knew what he was really like. Sirill seemed unable to bear the antics and words of Reichart, his worst enemy, any longer. His assistant shouted at the gentleman not to give in to provocations, while Reichart delved into Sirill's complexes without stopping. Sirill is usually cool and rational. In this situation, he should have given in, following the guard's advice. But Haley had completely forgotten that Reichart had been acting quiet lately, but he was originally a fighting dog. She wanted the young man to show this parasite who was boss here, and she watched their fight from around the corner. There were already too many people gathered on the street, hearing someone waving swords in the alley. One of the local residents recognized the faces of those fighting and realized for sure that he had seen them somewhere. And it was the same man who saw Haley kidnap the princess during the day at the market. The hero's problems were growing, and Haley understood that now was not the time for a fight, and they needed to run quickly. Reichart promised to sort it out on his own, but Haley assured him that if he stayed here, he would be executed. She screamed that she couldn't cope alone, and who would drive the cart if the young man stayed here? He realized they needed to escape the city as soon as possible, and asked Haley to trust him. The young man grabbed her tightly with his hand, while the lady held onto his shoulder and began to run with her. The residents began to call the guards, the kidnappers ran away, and Sirill did not understand why Reichart ran away so abruptly. After the winter house was destroyed, Reichart was the only survivor of the entire family. It was said that his last move was to try to find Haley for revenge, after which he disappeared. But Sirill did not understand who that girl was, and everyone who was close to Reichart had to die. After narrowly escaping the soldiers at Grandis, the heroes sneaked across the mountains last night and made their way to Holt. They found themselves in the domain of a treacherous count who sent poachers, and now they couldn't even enter the city. Haley was indignant that if a young man suddenly encountered an enemy in an alley, he couldn't immediately rush into a deadly grip. Reichart understood perfectly well that he still wouldn't be able to kill Sirill, but he screamed furiously that he was ready to finish him off. Suddenly, the young man uttered a strange word about the girl having once loved this man. At first, Haley didn't understand what was going on, but then she remembered the original plot of the novel. Haley actually said at once that the man she loved was Sirill. The past heroine loved this young man, but the present Haley found it strange. Out of kindness, she would have chosen Eugene, and in terms of her status as crown prince, Holt, and these heroes were much more worthy. But for some reason, Haley chose Sirill, with his sarcastic character, painful perfectionism, trauma, and deep complexes. She was Haley, but at the same time she wasn't her, so the heroine didn't fully understand her tastes. So now she could only say one thing: the story with Sirill was over forever. Haley admitted that things were completely different now, and she no longer had feelings for that man. She denied her love for this man, and declared that her ideal was the 1,000-year-old belle. For some reason, Reichart was delighted by this news, and now their tastes completely coincided. Holt's border was not such a prosperous trading city, but the heroes managed to find everything they needed to build the bridge. To be honest, Reichart was surprised that the lady couldn't do anything. She admitted that she grew up in luxury. Having loaded the last orders from the kitchen team into the cart, the heroes finally returned to the castle. Fatima carefully prepared the promised dish, and it could not simply be called tomato stew with beef and butter. The lady even decided to give another name to this dish, which the little elf liked so much. She suggested calling it the cursed demonic stew of beef, butter, and tomatoes. From that day on, Haley and the estate's inhabitants united in their efforts to reach civilization, and at the end of summer, on the threshold of autumn, a sturdy wooden bridge rose over the gorge. Haley called it the Demon Bridge, and Taraja didn't really like the name. The lady was sure that even though they could not continue the Marquise's work, they should still show respect. All the residents of the estate were incredibly happy, and on the day the construction of the demonic bridge was completed, everyone was in a festive mood. The Marquise thought these people were truly amazing, and she thought it would take at least a year, but the bridge was built very quickly. Reichart asked the girl to pay attention to his skills and swung his axe right next to her. At first, she didn't understand what she should be looking at, but in the young man's courageous hands, the axe gained new strength. With one deft movement, he split a huge tree, and it looked like madness. Haley knew he was strong, but not strong enough to cut down such a thick tree with one blow. Until recently, Reichart was not so agile, but recently changes have been occurring in his body. He became infected with bad magic, then purified himself, became infected again, and each time his body became stronger. Reichart wanted to tell, but the growth was so insignificant that he himself was confused and thought it was the result of daily training. This definitely couldn't happen, but Haley realized that it definitely looked like something and asked the young man to come closer. She realized that the damned novel was continuing according to the original plot, no matter what she did, and Reichart was slowly turning into a half-demon. She looked at him carefully. There were no signs of demonization, his ears were not pointed, and horns had not grown. Haley placed her hand on his chest, feeling that there were no traces of dark magic left in his body. She looked at Reichart with fear, convinced that in front of her was just an ordinary human body. And at that moment, the young man was surprised why the Marquise was pawing at him like that, and now she looked like a pervert. The situation was such that it was impossible to breathe, and even one of the woodcutters began to fight with a sword like a knight. The lady decided to ask if there were any physical changes or increased aggression, but the man had no problems other than strength. The woodcutter was sure that the experience of resurrection from the dead was worth trying at least once. After listening to Reichart's story and talking to the loggers, it turned out that they all had similar experiences. Suddenly, Haley remembered the holy knight-turned monster they encountered in the village. He continued to move even after his head was cut off. The magic power extracted from his heart was similar to normal magic, but different. In the knight's heart, in a space deliberately distorted by someone, an unfinished core was placed that created a monster. The compressed vortex of filth could possibly be a way to create real demons. It seemed like Haley was beginning to realize she could do it too. Create a sphere of filth and then repeat the compression and rotation. Soon she managed to create not that wretched core of a monster, but something more perfect and powerful. The clod of filth that she was spinning soon acquired centrifugal force and began to draw in filth itself. At some point, Haley couldn't control it anymore and tried to slowly reduce the rotation to push away the strong magic. After some time, the whirlwind of filth gradually lost its direction and dissipated like fog. When the rotation of the sphere completely stopped, in the hand or was compressed badly in an amount equal to what flows within a radius of 100 meters. The heroine managed to create something incredible, a tiny little magic core. And it was that very core of corruption that turned the Holy Knight into a monster. In a small farming trading town called Enif, the fields were already ripening with harvests. The princess was haunted by Haley's words because she warned that at the beginning of autumn, a demon would appear in the swamp. Most of Kasnathura's territory consists of vast plains, and there is only one place called the swamp, stretching across the infected lands to the very outskirts, and if Haley's words are true, the demon will definitely appear there. The princess's maid said that if she and Sirill had seen this landscape together, they would have definitely become closer. But there was only her and one excommunicated priest, and the princess asked Lily to stop empty talk. She was afraid that this might embarrass the young man, but he suggested not to listen too much to her words. The princess decided to ask if he knew the name of the Marquise Marin. The young man admitted that anyone who serves in the church cannot help but know this name. the name of the follower of demons who ruled the infected lands 100 years ago. Haley asked him to find out why the church created the monster, and the young man decided to find out using his own methods. There was no word about keeping the secret, and recently the young cardinal began to mention some big names. Sirill, Macklin, and for this hair, Haley killed innocent people. Rango decided to use the princess because she is close to Sirill. In order to use the information effectively, you need to get to the source. But now, as luck would have it, at this very moment they both ended up here by the will of the Marquise. Now, if the demon appears as per her prophecy, the princess will indeed defeat him. Rango understood that he would have to stick tightly to the demon Marquise, and it would be safest next to that woman. Once Haley had created the core of the taint, she revealed some surprising news to Taraja. The elf was indignant. Why did the lady call him to tell nonsense when he had a lot of work in the field? Now that Haley had leveled up, she thought the elf would be able to see his fellow tribesmen again, so she called him. Several months ago they explored the territory, and the elf was sure that almost all of his tribesmen lived in one place. He was once just a child born during the time of the infection, so he believed that somewhere there were dryads older than him who survived. Haley was confident that once she had enough power to create a core, she could try to find them again. But Taraja had been searching for a long time and had lost all faith, because if it weren't for Lady Haley, he would still be in that whirlpool in the river. According to the mechanism that the heroine understood when creating the core, the filth, under the influence of the environment, rotates and contracts, repeating the cycle. In the original, there was no explanation as to why the demons appeared, and there was only a story about them appearing one day in the infected lands. The heroine suggested that this meant that demons could arise naturally. The little elf was scared. Maybe he was also a demon, but the heroine calmed him down. He definitely does not belong to the demon. Taraja wanted to know who he really was, and begged the lady to tell him by answering an important question. It seems the little elf really was much stronger than Haley had assumed. She confessed that in her opinion he was a dryad who once almost became a real demon. The core of corruption that raged in that whirlpool was very slowly turning the elf into a demon. But perhaps this is what saved his life, and the heroine found the elf in time and stopped the transformation. The elf said that this couldn't be. He believed that in this damned castle at least he would be the only normal one. Haley said that Taraja turned into a half-dryad, half-demon. That is, half-dryad and half-demon. The heroine showed her friend a small core of filth, from which an ominous aura emanated. Taraja was right. This was the core of the filth, and with its help, she could make him a full-fledged half-dryad, half-demon. The little elf screamed for the girl to immediately remove this dangerous thing from his face. The tiny cannonball flew straight into the pot where Haley's rosemary beauty was growing. The rosemary she had recently found in the cleared garden and dug up with her own hands was now infused with dark magic. The core instantly disappeared, dissolving into the pot, and the plant seemed to absorb its power. It all started with a very minor misfortune. There was very little grain left, and no one wanted to buy the harvest from the contaminated land. One of the girls asked her husband to calm down, suggesting that they rest, and she decided to collect at least some herbs before sunset. A peasant couple living near the contaminated lands simply wanted to live a little better, but they understood that by selling their harvest, they would never get beyond the contaminated zone. That evening, the wife gritted her teeth in determination, looking for a way to distance herself at least a little from the cursed zone. She believed that if she worked a little, saved a little, she and her husband would finally get out of here. Every day she went deeper and deeper for medicinal herbs, and one day she fell into a gorge where something frightening was waiting for her. The lady sat in horror on the cold, wet ground as the dark magic around her was saying goodbye. The peasant woman injured her leg when she fell and was no longer able to get back up. The next day, a man appeared on the threshold of Enif's castle, asking to save his wife. The knight tried to find out what happened and where the man got such terrible injuries. He said that a demon had swallowed his wife's body and asked people to help him somehow. The farmer's cries as he fell to the ground soon filled the street, and it became known to everyone that his wife had become possessed. Sympathizing with their neighbor, but fearing that evil spirits might come, everyone just clicked their tongues from afar. And there was only one person who helped Mr. Dre, and that was Princess Asta. It was the first time he saw this girl who told him that she was the real princess of Casnathura. Asta decided to go to the order and ask the cardinal for help, assuring him that he would be able to expel the demon from his wife's body. The man did not know how to thank the princess, and sitting on his knees in front of her, he shed bitter tears. Asta went to the church to ask for help from the cardinal as well as from the Order of Knights. She immediately turned to Cardinal Mephius so that the Knights of the Order could fight the demon that had appeared. The princess said that it was not just a matter of fighting. She wanted to pacify the man who had become a demon without taking his life. And if there are knights called the Shield, her spirit will unite with them, and then it will be possible to do so. The cardinal said that recently a demon was running amok in the outskirts, and the princess asks to take him alive when they do not know his capabilities. The princess insisted that while they sat idly by, people could die, and she didn't want anyone to get hurt. The cardinal insisted that if the princess were to suffer while doing something reckless, things would be difficult for them in the future too. The cardinal admitted that sometimes sacrifices had to be made, and until the matter was completed, the princess had to remain in the church. Asta did not expect such impudence, and could not simply watch as the subjects of her kingdom suffered. The princess stated that if the order was not ready to help her, she would fight the demon alone, and that was her wish. The cardinal only promised to convey to the Lord about the emergency situation, and warned that the princess was free to do as she wished. Soon, huge black crows appeared over the city, which foreshadowed the appearance of dark forces. The Knights of the Order asked the inhabitants to immediately leave the village and go to Enif Castle, asking for protection. Fear enveloped the inhabitants, and the knight managed to see a zombie peasant woman with red eyes, the same wife, approaching them. The Lord's castle received news that the number of residents who had fled from the flood had already exceeded 100. The Lord wondered what had happened to the soldiers who had been sent on reconnaissance. They say they all died, including those who followed them as reinforcements. The Lord could not believe it, because if demons had risen, those with divine power must intervene. It was said that Princess Asta was going to provide support and asked for the gates to be opened. The locals asked the princess to protect them from the evil demon, and they believed that Asta would return safe and sound. She asked the magical spirit Ventus to appear and calm the people, and the bird heard its mistress. Flapping his huge white wings, the magical spirit soared into the sky, right up to the clouds. The bird told people that it had arrived and that they should no longer be afraid, because the destruction of demons was its joy. The locals praised the Spirit King, the treasure of Casnathura, and at that moment the name of the princess was engraved in the hearts of the citizens. In the corner of the square, filled with jubilation, there were people whose atmosphere separated them from the general appearance, and they were heroes. Haley and Reichart were standing around the corner, and the heroine immediately suggested running away from here. But it was they who chose to eat meat rather than worldly affairs, and they were the ones who agreed with it. The reasons for their arguments can be summed up in several scenes, and when the woodcutter asked to check the bridge, Haley decided to go shopping. When the heroes entered the city, Haley was outraged. The doors were locked again, and this happens every time she wants to buy food. Even when Haley knew the demon was coming, she saw the princess going to defeat him. In the end, the heroes simply forgot about the original's timeline and went shopping, but Haley couldn't reveal her identity. Reichart suggested going alone, but the heroine knew that this could not be done, and the events of the protagonist winning the title of saint would evaporate. The young man asked if she really believed the princess more than him, but there is a law in the world: the main character must win. Haley understood that this might be a somewhat unfamiliar concept for Reichart, so he wanted to do it himself. At that moment, she heard a familiar voice that saw her face, and it was the snow beast, Rango. Rango, as expected, was obedient and did the job. He disguised himself as a priest and was with the princess, finding out information. After this suppression, Asta will become a saint, and if the young man becomes her supporter, then joining the order is not that far away. Haley was just sad that her relationship with Rango was broken because of this, and in the end, he has to help the main character. The heroine was satisfied with the fact that she was getting closer to the original in some ways, and the Marquise's subordinate wanted to take part in suppressing the demons. Rango suggested that they sneak into the temple together, asking if she wasn't interested in the list of infected people. For Haley, it was a good opportunity. The work could move faster, but the hero must follow the princess. Reichart warned that if the boy revealed the location of the list, Haley and he would make sure to steal it. Rango was sure they wouldn't be able to get into the temple without his help, but Haley knew that the temple would soon be empty anyway, and Rango wouldn't have to interfere. In the temple, the priests discussed what to do, and the princess went alone to defeat the demon. The cardinal was sure that the princess would soon pay the price of her life because of her arrogance, and he definitely couldn't accept the fact that a fragile girl had such strength to defeat a demonic entity. At that moment, a message came. Sirill and his knights joined the princess, and the Lord ordered his soldiers to follow her. The cardinal was mistaken in thinking that Asta was a little girl, and in this situation, the order could be tainted by silence. He ordered all the holy knights to be gathered and prepared for immediate departure to the infected lands. As Haley expected, all the places controlled by the order were completely empty, and the heroes decided not to go to the temple at all. It was a stone room in the cemetery, which was under the control of the temple. Reichart didn't know that the priest would really leave no one behind, and there wasn't even a single paladin here. Haley said that the princess came out to suppress, revealed her name, and the order will definitely not sit idly by. She suggested finishing here first, but learned that if they rushed after him, they could strike a fatal blow. The area where the parishioners who made many donations were buried has been converted into a resting place for deceased priests and holy knights. It's a rather strange arrangement of a place from which no one will ever leave, and the location of the list they are looking for is definitely special. Here rested the chief priest, the one who had served the order faithfully with true faith, and the one who had dedicated his life to dispelling the shadow. The list that Rango stole from Grandis was hidden behind the name of this famous man. Reichart put his hand on the door, and it opened immediately, and Haley bravely suggested that they go downstairs. Since it was a secret document, the young man was sure the place would be guarded, but they only had to pass by the dead and get to the place where the criminals were locked up. He was glad there were no guards, but the place they went down to really looked creepy. A shiver ran through Haley's body. She just heard such a familiar sound that it seemed like home to her. The ominous sound grew louder, and when the heroes descended into the prison dungeon, they saw horror. The corrupted people left behind were what were once called paladins, and among them there was one man whose face was painfully familiar to the heroine. It was the same man who had accompanied the girl when she was sitting in the cage and had asked the assistant not to talk to her under any circumstances. Haley immediately recognized a rather familiar face among these people, and it was he who once looked at her without regret, mercilessly throwing her into the raging river.